like to call to order
Recording in progress.
this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart,
Here.
Councilmember Kovar, Councilmember Dvala, Councilmember Kostick,
Here.
Councilmember Siemens,
Present.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Councilmember Searcy,
Here.
Great. Terrific. All right. Looking ahead at our schedule, we are not meeting in our official capacity on next Wednesday evening. So our next meeting will be on November. Wow. November 3rd at 7:30. That night, we'll have a proclamation recognizing the Chesapeake Climate Action Network and their volunteers for their work removing invasive vines and protecting trees in the city. Our voting session that night will tentatively be the first reading ordinance regarding council compensation, a resolution adopting 2022 legislative priorities, a resolution providing for appointments to boards and committees, and a resolution for providing appointments to the Banking and Investment Task Force. That evening, we'll receive an update on a review of the Public Safety Task Force recommendations. Then on Wednesday, November 10th, we will have our regular city council meeting at 7:30. It will begin with a presentation of the new Ave Bikeway, which is 60% designs for Section B. Very exciting. Our voting session that night will be tentatively second reading ordinance for council compensation, single reading ordinance awarding a contract for compensation and pay equity study, single reading ordinance authorizing the purchase of a loader for public works, first reading ordinance awarding contract for organizational workforce needs and risk assessment study, and first reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code to require installation and maintenance of window guards in certain rental housing. Our work session that evening will be a presentation of draft redistricting maps. And then on Wednesday, November 17th, we'll have a presentation of the FY 2021 audit, presentation of the police pension actuarial valuation. Our voting session will be the second reading ordinance awarding a contract for organizational workforce needs and risk assessment study services, second reading on ordinance amending the code to require installation and maintenance of window guards in certain rental housing, and resolution providing for city council's winter recess. Our work session that evening will be our housing and community development director update, including annual reports from the Tacoma Park, the Tacoma Langley CDA and Old Town Business Association. And that will be our last official meeting of the fall. We will have a meeting on December 1st. That will be a special meeting. It's our joint meeting with our D20 delegation, and that will be at 7 p.m. It will also be remote and virtual. And then we will be on recess until Wednesday, January 12th. All right, that's our upcoming agenda items. We can go now to public comments. We had no public comments on voting items. We had 2 people sign up for general public comments, and I see, I think was Marika first.
yes, correct.
Okay. Oh,
Okay, sorry. It's actually me, not
Okay.
Marika, but there was this Zoom.
it's okay. Yeah. AJ, Miss Carpenter will start the clock and you can get going.
All right. In the dark days of the pandemic, I had a dream for our community to sort of come together in a brilliant display of eco-friendly solar lights, gather together listening to music, maybe lifting a glass of cider or hot chocolate, somewhere where we could all be together. The crowning glory was going to be a display in the manner of the coexistence icons at the gazebo. A menorah, a kinara, and some trees, some for the pagans, some for the Christians. And I wanted a way to see Tacoma Park come together and enjoy and happiness, maybe help some of the merchants make up some of the money they lost. Anyway, this is how the Winter Lights Festival started as an idea 12 months ago. I had a beautiful logo created. It was Roscoe in sort of like neonish lights. I just needed some money to wrap some of the lights in downtown and maybe work with Main Street Tacoma, but Sadly, nothing happened for a lot of reasons. I scaled back and I thought, well, if I could just get the coexistence display at the gazebo, then maybe people would see what I was trying to do and we could maybe do something next year. But I needed the city's menorah, and they're expensive to buy, and I certainly didn't have enough time to raise money. And every time I asked about it, the question was just pushed off and pushed off for 10 months. When I finally got the no way, I was shook. You know, we've had 2 swastikas here in less than 18 months. There were protests in our city calling for the destruction of Israel. And let's not get me started on that stupid film. And we have a menorah. We don't want to display it. 6 years, it's been sitting in a box. Maybe the city wants to keep it there. Maybe the city wants to dispose of it. I don't know. There are options and we can look at that, but it really hasn't been in conversation. It's been later. Let's not talk about it now. A menorah on display means something. As Jews, we're told to put it out in our front windows to show that we're Jewish, that we don't have to hide or to be conversos, a forced convert. I wanted to display the menorah and along with all the other symbols and plan this really cool event because maybe I just wasn't feeling part of Tacoma Park, you know? Maybe when the Sunrise Movement today, for example, said that they won't stand with Jews, maybe I think that some people in Tacoma Park think that too. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Sean Henley.
I'm sorry, I've had a hard time bringing him into the meeting, but Sean, you should be allowed to speak now. I'm asking you to unmute.
Okay, got it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, this is Sean Henley. I work for the city of Tacoma Park up at Public Works, and I'm the president of AFSCME, Local 3399. I first wanted to mention that I support the fair and equitable compensation for all labor, including that done by our mayor and council. Those positions should not be assumed as a labor of love, and an increase in compensation will hopefully remove an obstacle in participation for those in more precarious economic situations. I'd like to ask that as you all begin consideration of nearly doubling an increase to your own or future council's compensation, you also consider helping to resolve our union's current impasse with city management. We're asking for a fair wage adjustment that reflects current inflation rates, as well as premium pay for frontline workers from the over $17 million ARPA funds that were distributed to the city. That's all I have. We have a website up with more information as to what we're asking for and financial information provided from the city. It's at help.tacomaparkworkers.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I believe those are all the public comments for this evening. Any council comments? Councilwoman Dabala.
Yes, I've been asked to read this announcement. So many of you already know that Rain Scanlon, who is a long-term volunteer in Tacoma Park behind the baseball league that we all know and love, and so many other things, in addition to his professional life as a laborer, has passed away last month, and there is a memorial service and gathering, an open house for him this weekend from 3 to 7 at College Park this Saturday, with around 4 o'clock a time for people to speak. And it will be outdoors with masks. And if anyone wants details, I can you can contact me and I can share the announcement also with the mayor and the city manager in case for some reason you want to contact them instead. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council comments? Councilmember Kovar.
Sorry, my Zoom is very slow tonight for some reason. I apologize for that. Couple of things I wanted to mention. One, I'm glad that Councilmember Duvall mentioned Ray Scannell's passing and the event in his honor, and certainly do intend to participate in that event. And there was also another unfortunate loss in the community. I learned that Larry Silverman, who's a longtime resident in Ward 1 and also longtime owner of a business, previously in Old Town, now still in Old Town area, but in DC, the S&AD store recently passed. And so I understand that just happened. I don't know a lot about it. It's a big loss. Larry is someone I worked with on Capitol Hill dating back several decades. And I don't know at this point if there's anything that's been announced in terms of services yet, but I'll just mention that. And he's someone who I think council members will recall has frequently spoken up on a wide range of issues here too. So big loss for the community. Unrelated to that, I did want to mention for those who are interested, in particular for North Tacoma, there's another Montgomery College update forum on the construction of the new math science building there. That's going to be on November 2nd at 6 p.m. And if you contact me, I can send you the link with the Zoom credentials in order to get on there. I also wanted to thank Montgomery College for coordinating a small tour they had recently of the area around the site and partly in the site and the neighborhood nearby, with several residents to look at some of the water issues connected to the construction site, and then to discuss how subsequently, once the building's done, some of the water retention issues will be handled. So I appreciate that. I know it's a small group because we couldn't have a whole neighborhood tromping through the building site, but it was a helpful thing. And then I think this has been mentioned before, and maybe the mayor's mentioned it previously, but I know a lot of people I hear from all the time about various aspects of pedestrian and vehicle safety on state highways. And we have these periodic meetings with the State Highway Administration. The next one is coming up on November 2nd. And it's my understanding that people can observe the meeting. So I'm not sure if there's
Sorry,
anything.
Councilmember Kovar, did you say the
Yeah.
2nd or the 9th?
The 9th, sorry, did I say
Sorry.
the second? Yeah, the 9th.
Yeah, I
right,
think you
the
did.
9th.
Sorry. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I also don't
No.
want people to write down the
said
2nd.
I said the wrong time. Yeah, it's the 9th and it's in the afternoon. And again, I'm sure it'll be posted and people can contact me about it, but that's something that members of the public, residents, will be able to observe. Usually we've done that in a private meeting, but this time it'll be a public meeting. So I've certainly passed on all the safety concerns that people in the part of town I represent have raised with me, and I'm sure my colleagues have done the same. So I look forward to a helpful discussion on that. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilman Costick.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to share out a few items from the Transportation Planning Board meeting that we had today. We adopted a resolution endorsing the COG board's resolutions that the mayor mentioned a couple of weeks ago with regard to the high occupancy transit centers and the equity emphasis areas. I think as we talked about before, just really, this is a really useful tool in terms of land use planning for the region and transportation planning for the region and racial equity. And I'm really hopeful that this will be a good step in the right direction for the region. We also got some interesting updates on regional travel overall. There was a recent regional travel survey as well as some updates on the impacts of COVID on both on transit and on traffic volume. So interestingly, telework levels, as I think is unsurprising, are higher than they were pre-pandemic at the moment. But the level of traffic overall is about back to about 95% of pre-pandemic levels, which is pretty concerning given that 95% of people are probably not back in the office. So what that means for the future in terms of traffic volume and people returning to transit, because transit use is down much more significantly than that 95% return on cars. So what that means for the long term, I think it is going to be very important. And there aren't any really clear answers at the moment, but there is a lot of work to be done in terms of making sure that people feel comfortable getting back on transit and that people don't mode switch to using their cars post-pandemic in ways they weren't before. There's also some interesting and fairly unsurprising, but interesting data on telework levels being very high, about a half-mile radius from high occupancy transit centers, which makes a lot of sense if people were using that to commute. And also in higher income areas as well. And then we also had a really great discussion and presentation on bus fare relief, some of the free and reduced ride initiatives that have been happening around the region, and some of the impacts of that on the positive side. Obviously that comes with a cost, but it also comes with a lot of benefits. And we also talked about a new very interactive map, which I'll send around a link to, that looks at bus access throughout the region, and particularly overlays that with the equity emphasis areas and the high occupancy transit areas. So a lot of really interesting information, and we had some really great discussions about the needs, particularly for bus and transit in the region, and how to make that access more equitable and better as we move forward for climate and equity and safety and a whole bunch of other reasons. So a lot of really great discussion and positive direction there, I think, and I'll share out more information as that develops. So just wanted to give those updates, and that's all for me. Thank you.
Councilman Costick, if I could ask you, was there any information regarding WMATA and Metro and the service? If perhaps we got some inside info at TPB today about how they're addressing this and when we might expect the trains?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think everybody's probably heard about the many trains that have been taken out of service because of the derailment issue. We did not get any new information about it. They're working with the transportation safety agency that oversees that sort of thing. And we did ask for a report from WMATA on it. I'm not sure exactly when we will get that or what that will look like, because they are also working through their procedures that they have to follow in terms of the safety requirements. But they're definitely open to that. And there was sort of a sense that although the situation itself is very concerning and we're concerned about what was known previously and when this is known and those sorts of questions, it's also a really good sign that they took quick action when they found out and took these steps that needed to be taken. So kind of a double-edged sword there, but hopefully there will be some more news coming out on that soon.
Great. Thank you so much for the update. Councilwoman Searcy.
Great. Good evening, everyone. So there are a couple of updates that I have. One, because we will not be meeting as a council next week, I just want to run through all of the fun Halloween activities that are happening next week, just so that everyone can get their costumes ready. So there will be the Trunk and Treat that is happening on Ann Street. Our police department is putting together a really fun event, and that is on Friday the 29th from 4 to 6. We also have Monster Bash. That is on Saturday, October the 30th, and that is from 1 to about 5. So that's another event. And the New Hampshire Gardens community is also having a Halloween block party event, and that is on the 31st, and that is Sunday from 4 until 6. So there's a lot of fun activities that are happening in celebration of Halloween, so definitely go out to some of those events. Also, I want to thank the residents in the New Hampshire Gardens community who worked on weeding and seeding the big island that is at Glenside and Wildwood. They got out there and they were out there for a couple of hours, really trying to clean up some of our green space in the neighborhood. So I just want to thank those residents that volunteered their time on the 17th, and that was last week. Also, just want to make sure that the Hillwood Manor community knows that I will be attending your picnic. So I will be there on Saturday from 4 until 7. And one other shout out. So I don't know if folks had an opportunity to attend the HCD staff, the planning department put together a really interesting public space management session. And one was at the rec center, and that was a really great experience, not only to work with some residents that were able to come out, but to actually experience, for residents to experience some of the hard challenges that we and our planning department do in terms of trying to make decisions around public space ideas for development. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot about my constituents, but also learned a lot about all of the things that are possible with some green space. And so I want to encourage folks to, I believe there's a virtual session that has been added to the calendar. I believe that is on November the 1st, but I could be wrong about that. But there should be additional opportunities to participate, and I do want to encourage folks, particularly in Ward 6, to attend the virtual event because it is a great way for us to learn together. So I want to thank the planning department for putting that together on, I believe it was Saturday. My days are just running together. And it was really a really interesting approach to having a community discussion around planning management and space management. And that is all I have.
Great. Councilmember Smith.
First, I want to thank staff for hosting the public space management meeting at Sligo View Park at the bottom of Houston Avenue. It was a good turnout. Residents really appreciated the opportunity to discuss some of the issues that they see and some of the ideas that staff had come up with. And so I really appreciate the time. There is going to be another opportunity this Saturday at Essex House Apartments from 10 to 11 to do another one of these public space management meetings. So if you have an opportunity, please drop by. Finally, I hope staff would really consider Ms. Campbell's comments regarding the menorah. I think that is an important, meaningful display during the holidays. It means a lot to millions of people around the world. I just spent time at a 12-hour vigil with faith groups, the mainline religions, to bring attention to the Build Back Better proposals that the president has put forth. I think we should celebrate the menorah, our Christian traditions, many other mainline religious groups. So I hope staff thinks about this once again, or maybe, I don't even know if staff has really considered this, but I think this would be a great opportunity. And I thank Ms. Campbell for continuing to bring this up. I know it's difficult, but do support everything that you're doing on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith. Any other questions, comments? I had a couple of things. One, I want to thank the staff for their assistance in writing and getting out very quickly a letter regarding a redistricting map that had been proposed by the committee looking at new districts in Montgomery County that actually split our city in two different county council districts. We were told very quickly that that map would not be moving forward at the meeting this evening because one of the, as this absolute guidelines we were told for the redistricting process is that it must keep municipalities intact. So thank you to staff. I think it was important that we quickly turned around that letter. And I know we'll probably know more tomorrow on what is going to go forward to the county council in terms of the redistricting maps. I also want to thank the staff for the open space meetings. I was able to attend one of them over the weekend. And it was really fantastic. I just want to reiterate what Councilmembers Searcy and Smith said, and I hope folks do get a chance to go to one of them. It was very well organized. They were kind of a fun activity that we did, and I can't say enough good things about it. So I just really want to thank the staff for all their work on that. This weekend was a busy weekend. Did food distribution with Tommy's Pantry. I want to thank all the folks from the local PTAs that continue that work. And Small Things Matters did have an event on Saturday that almost got rained out, but not quite. We still showed up to it, and Congressman Raskin, even in the pouring rain, showed up and provided a citation to Small Things Matters. And I will just say that Delegate Lori Charkoudian and I did beat Delegate Moon in a race to pack the van. So it was a little wet, but a good time on Saturday. What else do we need to talk about? I've been asked to pass on, unfortunately, the Tacoma Park Volunteer Fire Department will not be selling trees this year because the folks that they usually get their trees from, they're not able to do. So plan ahead, I guess. They asked me to pass on that information. They're doing some other fundraising activities that you can find on their website. And then last night, I was able to, the social justice group at the Presbyterian Church that has been providing us information and their feedback on the ARPA funds. I met with them last night with representatives from the Mayors for Guaranteed Income and had a discussion with them about guaranteed income and what the Mayors for Guaranteed Income does. So that was helpful. And if other people are interested in some of those materials, I'm happy to pass them on, as I know the staff are looking into that as a possibility for our ARPA funds. I think there's probably a lot more happening, but I just want to thank everyone again, and we'll move on to city manager comments.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council. Just a few comments this evening. First one, I just like to just start off with continue to encourage members in the community to continue to mask up and get their vaccinations, not only for yourself, but for your loved ones and your families and others. We want to continue to keep each other healthy and well in the community. You probably saw this afternoon, the FDA authorized Moderna and Johnson & Johnson vaccine boosters. So you can now mix and match manufacturers for your booster shots. Moderna and Pfizer, 6 months after your first shots, and Johnson & Johnson after your one-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it's 2 months after you're able to get that booster. There will be and is discussed about potential for it to be a tough and serious flu season, coupled with the potential of a COVID-19 surge through the holidays over the next couple months. So we want to be vigilant. And just wanted to share that the city management, we're going to continue our mask mandate for indoors. We'll continue that, keep it in effect for all city buildings and facilities, for all staff and visitors, whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated. And internally, we will continue with our vaccination attestation program, which may expand in the near future as we continue to monitor and evaluate current conditions and talking with our public health providers at the state and county levels. The next item I just want to share with you this evening, and the mayor touched on it, that will be coming forth in a couple weeks, but in the Public Works Department, we'll be bringing forth a loader purchase. It's a 15-year-old loader. It's reached the end of its useful life. We have the funds already in fiscal year 22, the CIP budget. I believe we have a budget for 200,000, but we'll be able to trade that the old vehicle in and maybe receive a new loader for less, for around $133,000. And more information will be forthcoming when we bring it to you early November. And then the last topical area that I'll leave off tonight is just want to just share with you as it relates to ARPA. The ARPA manager is currently in pre-employment screening, and we hope to have that person on board very, very soon. So we're very excited to have that individual join the team. And staff has not stopped our process while we wait for our ARPA manager to get in place. We have continued to having our deliberations. We've been working very hard, engaging other municipalities to kind of see where everyone is. And it seemed like we're all at the same place, trying to develop our spending plans across the state and across the nation. We want to thank you, Mayor, members of council, as well as the community for providing your suggestions and proposals, whether you use the email or whether you sent it in to one of the members of leadership. We appreciate that. We have included all of that in our deliberations, all suggestions that we received to date. We're working on developing a process to further evaluate and prioritize the suggestions and effort to prepare our staff recommendations to council. And we're taking an intentional and strategic approach, as many other local governments are, to build out the set of criteria and metrics for success that will portray how staff came to the recommendations that we'll be providing council. And those metrics could include anything, but not limited to, whether it be cost, impacts, equity, the treasury guidance, budget impacts, whether it's one-time, ongoing, as we look to January and the budget season commencing. So with that, those are all my comments this evening. Thank you, Mayor and members of council.
Great. Thank you, City Manager. Next, we have a number of minutes to adopt. We have May 3rd, May 5th, May 12th, and May 19th. Would someone please move adoption of those minutes? Councilwoman Dabala moved, Councilwoman Costick second. Any comments, changes? Okay, seeing none, will the clerk call the vote on adoption of the minutes?
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Next, we have our voting session. Our first item is a single reading ordinance authorizing use of $250,000 from the Housing Reserve Fund to support the renovation of Hillwood Manor Apartments on Linden Avenue. And we had a presentation on this project in July. I know Councilwoman Searcy and I have been more intimately involved in some of the conversations, but I'll turn it over to Director Cross to provide us with some details.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to everyone for having me on tonight. As the mayor said, this is the single reading ordinance allowing the city manager to use $250,000 from the Housing Reserve Fund to support the renovation of Hillwood Manor. First, I'll talk a little bit about the Housing Reserve Fund, and then I'll go into some specifics. Just to let you know, Stephanie Rudman from MHP is on the line, and she's also available to answer questions and details about the project that you may have. So the Housing Reserve Fund is dedicated for purposes of advancing affordable housing programming identified in the city's economic development and strategic plan. Projects that may be funded include the purchase of existing housing, rehabilitation or repair of existing housing, demolition of unsafe structures, land acquisition, construction of new housing, down payment assistance, subsidies for mixed income and mixed use developments, and pre-development activities. So this being the rehabilitation or repair of existing housing, this meets the requirements of the Housing Reserve Fund. Some details about the Hillwood Manor project itself. Hillwood Manor is a 96 unit property in Ward 6 on 1100 Linden Avenue. The project is approximately $36.7 million in total. It is a full renovation of all of the units. There will still be remain 96 units once the renovation is completed. MHP has, which is Montgomery Housing Partnership, are the developer on the project. They have garnered multiple public and private funding sources, including LIHTC funding. LIHTC financing requires income restrictions on the property, which is, and the income restriction is a maximum of 60% of AMI. The renovation will result in 96 units ranging from 1-bedroom apartments up to 4-bedroom apartments. There will be 60 affordable units at 60% AMI, 23 affordable units at 50% AMI, and 13 affordable units at incomes less than 30% AMI. This project meets a number of the city's housing and economic development strategic plan goals. One being the preservation of the affordability of the existing multifamily housing stock, the conservation and improving of the physical condition of the existing low to moderate cost housing stock, and planning, building, and maintaining properties, buildings, and neighborhoods with environmental sustainability as a major consideration. MHP has a number of green and sustainable design elements in the project, and I will let Stephanie, if we need her to discuss, go over some of those green design elements. For the financing, the city wants to show its commitment to preserving affordable housing stock and improving the condition, safety, resiliency, and energy efficiency by committing $250,000 from the Housing Reserve Fund. That is planned to be in 2 tranches, one in FY22 for $125,000 and another in FY23 for another $125,000. The project is estimated to be completed in June 2023. And the Housing Reserve Fund has a balance of $645,668.28. So the committed funds of $250,000 fits within the current balance of the Housing Reserve Fund. With that, I'll stop and I can answer any questions as well as Ms. Rubman can answer some project detail questions.
Great. Thank you, Director Cross. I just first want to turn to Councilman Searcy and see if she wanted to say a few words about the project.
Thank you. First, I just want to say thank you so much to Director Cross and Stephanie and staff over at MHP. This project has been one that, once completed, will really, really, truly impact the lives of residents that live in Hillwood Manor Apartments. If you have not had to deal with some of the issues that those residents have faced in those units, you would not have any idea as to how badly these renovations are needed. I appreciate MHP for taking on the task, for acquiring the property in the state that it was in, and I appreciate them for doing the long and hard work of trying to secure the funding necessary to make the improvements. I think this is a case where it's important for us to put our money where our priorities are. And this is one example of how we can use those housing reserve funds to really improve the housing stock in the city. So I don't have any questions because I feel like I've talked both Alex and Stephanie to no end. I'm pretty sure Stephanie probably has me on speed dial at this point. But I do want to say how much I truly support the work that's happening at this project. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. And thank you to MHP for participating in this project. And people have heard me say, a number of times that I think it's really important for the city to collaborate with outside partners, whether financial institutions or nonprofit NGO type of organizations like MHP. So I think this is, as Mr. Cross said, the kind of project that we should do, and it's an appropriate use of our funds. And so I really look forward to it. I do have one question, and if maybe the MHP representative could respond. I understand that there's some relatively modest number of families or households that won't be able to stay once it's completed. And if I understand correctly, with the low-income housing tax credit program, there are income cutoff levels in it for above that. That's the issue. So I just want to make sure I understand how we're going to address that and provide assistance to those families and who's responsible for doing that, et cetera.
Yep, sure. So first, again, I want to thank everybody for allowing MHP to be here again for the third, fourth, or fifth time, and for you all listening to us. So thank you to the mayor, Director Cross, and all the council members. So I'll just answer your question directly without getting into too much, because we've already talked a lot about the project, but the low-income housing tax credits have required for their life since they were enacted in 1989 that tenants, families have an income less than 60% of area median income. In the last, I think, 2 years, there was an amendment that said that tenants could go up to 80% of area median income. Congress was supposed to issue some regulations clarifying how this worked. For every tenant that was over 60%, you had to have a corresponding one under 30%, and it became very complicated and very complicated to enforce for the management companies. And investors started getting a lot of cold feet. And from what we hear now from our tax credit syndicator, investors are no longer doing these projects above 60% of area median income. So we're sort of back to where we were 2 years ago. So that's kind of a roundabout way of saying that all tenants have to be under 60% of area median income. Now, when we do new construction, this is not an issue, right? We just bring everybody in at 60% of AMI, and we feel like we're helping the tenants that are most in need. When we do rehabs, it can be more of a complicated issue because the projects often have some units with tenants that make over 60% of AMI. So what do we do about this? So we are highly regulated in how to handle the tenants under the Uniform Relocation Act. So that's number one. So it's all federally regulated. So we follow the guidelines to the T under the Uniform Relocation Act. We have outside counsel that advises us on how to notify tenants. And we also have hired a professional relocation company, Housing to Home, to help with the relocation. So what happens is we have our relocation company calling and meeting with not just the tenants that are above 60%, but every tenant, and there's individual one-on-one kind of counseling and guidance on what's going to happen for those tenants that have to move and how they have to move and all that. So for the people that are over 60% of AMI, we talk to them about what the situation is and how we can help. We provide them a notice. We provide them a 90-day notice that they can't stay there because of their income. Then we provide them with relocation counseling. We help them to find another unit. In this case, we're helping people. We've done a lot of interviewing of tenants to find out where they want to live, where their jobs are, whether they have cars, whether they don't have cars, whether they have kids, and what schools they're in. So we know what their needs are. So we provide them relocation counseling. In addition, we pay for their moves. And then in addition, we're paying all these tenants that are between 60 and 80% of AMI, the maximum housing payment, which is $7,200. So everyone will get this amount of money. So as I said, we work with them every step of the way. If your next question is how many people are in this category, my answer is it's kind of complicated. Because of COVID, people are getting jobs and losing jobs faster than you wouldn't believe. Everyone has to be income certified within 120 days of the closing. So we've done income certifications, but maybe we did one in April or May. And so we have to redo it. So based on all the income information that we have now, that number of people between 60 and 80% is 13 families. But we have about 6 families that claim that they have either lost jobs or lost income since they were last income certified. So we are working with our property management company that does all the income certifications to re-income certify these people and to, see what income they fall within. So that being said, the number may vary between now and when the units are renovated. And the individuals, they can stay in their unit for now. What we have to be careful with is that when they can't move back into the renovated units. But we will try, we try to work with them now.
Well, that's really helpful. Just 2 other follow-up questions then, which I think are briefer. One, are there other options for people in that category in the area, generally speaking? And 2, for the people who can stay because their income is at or below the 60% level, they have to clear out for a while during the renovation, right? So where do they go? So just those 2 questions.
Yeah. So yes, there are lots of units for people to go to. If you're above 60%, first of all, we at MHP, a lot of our projects are mixed income. So we're working with all of our property managers. We keep lists of all vacancies. So this week, our 2 management companies have produced lists of all of our vacant units. So that's one option. And then 2, there's just the usual ways that people find apartments. We look in everything from apartments.com to, everyone else that we kind of know in the industry. So then to briefly answer your other question, yes, the tenants cannot stay in their units because the units are being gutted. There will be nothing there except a floor and a wall. And so the first phase is about 10 months. The other phases are 6 months. There's 4 phases of the project. And the people will be, there's 3 options for them. One is they can move to another unit on site, a vacant unit on site. We've stopped leasing up in like March. So we have 16 vacant units now. So we try to have vacancies so some people can stay who need to stay. Otherwise, we help, we don't help, we find other units in the area that people can move to, and we provide the movers. We've done this many times before. We move people out. We pay for the new unit regardless of that cost, and then we move them back. The third option is we allow people in this case, if they want to stay with family and friends during this time period, they don't have to pay their rent. And we give them a stipend for each month. So that's the third option. Hopefully that answered your question and was brief enough.
That does. And I just want to say those questions I think were important to have answered, but they don't diminish my support for the project. So thanks again.
Yep, they are important. Of course, they're a big part of the project. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Devala.
Yes, thank you. Good to see you again, Ms. Rudman. And to reiterate, I support the use of the housing reserve money for this project. I think it's really important to do this for a whole bunch of reasons. I have 2 comments and 2 questions. So my first comment is on the cover sheet. It says that we would need to amend the budget. My comment is, I think that is to transfer money from the housing reserve into the general fund to be able to spend it, not to add $250,000 to our budget.
Correct.
Right? Okay. Second comment, I really love that you're building in energy efficiency features. I think that's fabulous. And I wanted to see if either Mr. Cross or Ms. Rudman had any comments, more details on the electrification and the energy efficiency building being built in.
Sure.
Or beyond what was in the cover sheet, which listed some of the measures.
So Alex, is that what I sent to you? Is that what's in the cover sheet?
No. And I think it was also part of the presentation in July. So you could probably just give us a
Oh,
bi-
Okay, so.
the big picture, and then I think we can get Councilwoman DeBala more details,
Yeah.
because it was part of the presentation you gave in July.
Okay, so I'll give you the big picture and then I'll give you a few little teasers. So the big picture is, this project has a super old original boiler system that is constantly breaking, constantly leaking, and covered in asbestos. So the thing that we find that is the most green feature is to put individual HVAC units in each tenant's apartment. Because that way the tenants can regulate their own heat, regulate their own air conditioning, which they don't have right now, and control the amount of energy that they use. So that's just kind of big picture. The other thing that we're doing is we're putting in individual water heaters. So people are responsible for their own water usage. So these things seem kind of basic to a lot of people, but these things, when you pay for your utilities, you use what you need. So that's kind of big picture.
That's great. Thank you. I just wanted to
Okay.
touch on that and just let you know,
Yeah.
I noticed that you're still doing it and I feel really good about that. The two questions, and I apologize, Director Cross, for not warning you. The two questions that I do have to do with residents have reminded me that there are proposed to be a number of trees removed because the water and sewer lines are being dug up.
Yeah.
Which kind of requires trees to be moved. Whether there's an update on that, whether the city arborist has been out, et cetera. And the same question for the stormwater runoff for the property, which again, I understand was built into the original plans, just looking for an update.
Yeah, so I can answer that if you want. So we have been working, our civil engineers working very closely with arborist who's been out. We have submitted our tree protection plan, and we have gone back and forth a little bit on that. Maybe this will be a little bit of my opportunity to get a little on my high horse about all the requirements from the arborist and, in protecting the trees. It's incredibly expensive to put down all this wood and wood chips and to protect the trees, but we are doing that. And so, yes, that plan has been approved. We're back in asking for a little bit of a change in the plan just to try to cut off a couple zeros from the cost of that. But yes, that has been approved.
Okay.
And I think you asked about the stormwater. as well.
Yeah, there been any major changes to the design since we saw the presentation?
I'm going to say I don't think so, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't think there have been.
I think we can get you more information on that.
Yeah.
Well, I understand that first it goes through the county, which is coming up, and then the city reviews the stormwater details. So I was just touching on that. Great, thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your questions.
Councilmember Smith?
So thank you for being here this evening. I assume that this property is a LIHTC property. It uses LIHTC for the financing, so that there's so many restrictions.
It will be. It's not now, but it will.
It's not now. Okay. All right. So a couple things. One, when you talked about bringing in individual like water heaters, air conditioning and heating units, do the tenants actually have a relationship, a contract with those utilities, or does the landlord act as like the general utility contractor with, what is WSSC or Pepco? How does that relationship work?
Yeah. So we are no longer going to be using gas at that property, but the electric that's going to be used for the heating and for heating the water the Pepco will be billing the tenants directly. In terms of the water usage, we sub-meter the water, and the tenants the water bills get attached to the tenant's rent. And so that does flow through the owner. The tenants are supposed to pay their rent and their water at the same time. In the end, if a tenant, skips town and goes to Mexico, the owner is stuck with that water bill, which is different than the way the electric bill that's billed directly to the tenant.
So what happens if a tenant needs subsidies or assistance paying WSSC? Because most of those programs are set up directly through, whether it's a single family homeowner relationship or an apartment landlord, that utilities are included in the rent. So, tenants aren't worrying about those types of assistance. So how would you handle something like that if a tenant couldn't pay the water bill or needed assistance paying it?
Yeah, so I don't know much about those WSSC tenant assistance programs, and that's something it's a little bit more on the property management side. And so it's something I could find out. One thing I can tell you is that when we set the rents for the tenants, we have to, the LIHTC program has a maximum rent, let's say for 60%, let's say it's $1,000. We have to take into account the amount that the tenant is projected to pay for all their utilities, including water and electric. So, in theory, a tenant should not be paying more for rent plus utilities than they can afford according to the program. Which is not to say that things don't happen, but I just don't know about those tenant programs, and maybe somebody at the city does. And I imagine our property management company does as well, because they're pretty hands-on with the tenants in terms of providing all types of assistance.
Yeah, I'll just add that, I have a large building owned by Enterprise in my ward. And they have, they contracted with a third party to handle electricity. Has been a debacle. The tenants have not been able to receive subsidies or any type of assistance with these payments because the contracts are not directly in the tenant's name. It is so bad that Enterprise, after 5-7 years, is canceling that contract with Studebaker. So I'll just say that with these performers, I would not trust any of these numbers. The tenants that are in these units need a lot of assistance.
Yeah.
They were all, many of them are on the bubble of being employed, not being employed, losing a large portion of their income. And then when you add in the pandemic, it is really tough for these people. So I would just move cautiously when you're trying to add utilities to these vulnerable people. Now, do you guys ever do any surveys or follow-ups with people that no longer can qualify in MHP housing, and you have to, send them on their way? Do we know what ends up happening to these people? Do they go into a different type of subsidized housing? Do they start qualifying for housing vouchers, or do they become unhoused? What happens to these people?
Yeah, so I'm just going to make one comment on your water issue. So I have not heard great things about Studebaker. So luckily we're not using them, but we are using another reliable company to submeter the water that we use at our other property in Silver Spring, that we use at the Bonifant, which is our new property that we do submeter, and we have not had any problems. But I am going to kind of ask that question about what happens if a tenant needs assistance in that arena when it's not billed directly to them. Luckily, it's not the electricity, which is obviously the bigger bill. But I will follow up on that. And if I find out anything, I'll let Director Cross know, and he can pass it on to the council. Your other question, okay, what happens when tenants leave? So we do a lot of surveys of our tenants When somebody leaves an MHP property, we ask them where they're going and what they're doing. You know, they're not obligated to tell us, but we often ask, are they moving because of, you know, a job, or they've purchased a home, or, you know, moved in with family, whatever the reason is. So we do keep lists of why people have moved. We don't follow up with them once they've left. But this situation where, you know, people are over income does not happen very often. So it's kind of a rarity. It's not our, that's not our MO, I guess, right? So, you know, we keep our tenants, we don't have people move. And so we're not usually asking people to leave. It is not something we like to do. It is not something we generally do, and it's not something we plan to do in the future.
Thank you very much for your time.
Great. Thank you for answering those questions and for the work that you're doing. It is an incredibly exciting project that you're working on for all the things that you've outlined. And I think particularly as Councilman DeBala brought up some of the environmental sustainability initiatives there. And I know Councilman Searcy and I know, unfortunately, it's been a long time coming, and these residents really need this work to be done. And so thank you for taking on this project. So I will ask, since there's no other questions, if someone would like to move this single reading ordinance authorizing the use of $250,000 from the Housing Reserve Fund to support the renovation of the Hillwood Manor Apartments. Councilman Searcy, would you like to move it? Do I have a second? Councilman DeBala, second. Any other further questions or anything? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the vote.
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you, Stephanie, for joining us this evening, and Director Cross for walking us through that. Next, we have a consent agenda that contains a number of appointments to different boards and things. Before I ask someone to move the consent agenda, I do want to say thank you to everyone who applied. We're looking at the appointments for 4 boards and commissions: elections, COLTA, ethics, and tree. And tonight we'll talk more about some of the other committees. We had over 115 residents who applied, and I'm sure our subgroup on this will talk more about this later. And I just want to, again, thank everybody who did apply, thank my colleagues who have been reviewing the applications and bringing recommendations forward to us. We know this is not an easy task to go through all of these and to really think about the best configurations for the different commissions and boards that we have. So I want to thank everyone, all the residents who applied, and thank our colleagues for putting this together for us to consider. In addition, I want to thank the residents who have been serving on boards and commissions who are retiring. This has been, you've done a great deal of work for the city, some of you for many, many years, and we appreciate all of your service. And, you know, as we had done pre-COVID times, we had started to do a volunteer recognition ceremony in the city. And I hopefully in the spring, that might be something we could do again in person. But I just wanted to note that. And I think, am I turning it over to Councilmember Siemens to say a few words before I ask the consent agenda to be moved? Or no, he doesn't look like I'm supposed to turn him. All right, I'm not turning it over to anyone. Okay. So I will just ask for someone to move the consent agenda. Councilwoman Costick moved. Do I have a second? Councilwoman Searcy, second. Will the clerk call the vote? Or do I have any comments or questions? Sorry. All right, will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar,
Present.
Councilmember DeBala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right, that concludes our voting items for this evening. We'll now move on to our work session, our sessions, I should say. And the first is an update on election planning and options. And I actually don't know who's here from the Board of Elections. Who am I turning it? Am I turning over to the
Well,
city clerk or?
Yeah, just let me welcome Matthew Ling and Curtis Antonucci, the current co-chairs of the Board of Elections. And they are certainly looking forward to the additional board members who are going to be joining them. But for now, it's just two of them giving the
Oh,
Hello, can you hear me?
yes.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for this opportunity to serve again, as well as to present some information to you all. Feel free to interrupt me anytime during the presentation. Oops, is this sharing correctly? Sorry.
I think you're not in presentation.
There we
mode.
go. Oops. Curtis is also here
I am.
if you have any other
Sorry,
questions.
I had some problems unmuting, but I'm here and I'm looking forward to presenting for you today.
Great.
So for the 2022 election, we are on track to plan for an all mail-in election similar to what we did in 2020. And that means we're starting to identify and evaluate various vendors, technologies. Based off of our experience last election cycle, we really learned a lot about the most efficient, effective ways to do things. So we're looking at vendors now. We're also looking at the city code and charter to see if we need to make any further revisions. I'm not sure we need to, but we're looking at that as well. We are going to have a polling center open on election day, and we're probably going to have open voting centers, early voting centers open. I should say that everything we're planning right now is subject to change, if only because most of this the work that we've done so far was with the previous board, and since then we have 5 new members out of 7. So it is possible that the priorities may change or directions may change. So just keep that in mind. The election calendar is certainly subject to change. Right now, the nominating caucus is on September 13th, and we have 3 finance report deadlines before election day, and as well as the candidate financial. I think we're hoping to remove one of the, or maybe even 2 of the finance report deadline or reports. That's something we need to discuss with the new board. So these dates are probably subject to change. I think it makes sense to at least synchronize the candidate financial disclosure with at least one of the finance reportings. I know there's some discussion about changing the time of caucus, but I think that would be a charter amendment. So I'm not sure if that's something that we want to do. So these are subject to change, but these are what is currently in the code and in the charter. And of course, so one thing we want to look at, which we've discussed whether it would need code revisions, is complaint handling procedures. Last cycle, we basically relied on the general authorities to resolve complaints in an ad hoc basis. I think going forward, we are discussing adopting administrative regulations, which I believe the board is authorized to do under the code and the charter, and we would follow the requirements under the city code, and we would work with the city attorney to adopt regulations that would be appropriate. The regulations themselves would not really affect the substantive legal rights of any residents or candidates. They really just are to establish internal procedures for how we want to handle complaints, which we don't currently have. So I think it would be useful, and it would help the process seem more transparent, or be more transparent. So that's one thing that we're working on. There may need to be code revisions for this, but we're hoping we can do it through the administrative regulation process. Like I said, please stop me if anyone has any questions. There's a bit, so I just want to get through it. For the enforcement of the election code, the board's current thinking is that it would be best if there would be a determination or a finding after some kind of factual investigation, and that those reports be made public, and that would be the primary enforcement mechanism. So it wouldn't be fines, it wouldn't be anything else that's not already covered by the code. It's basically posting reports and making them public, and letting residents see the outcome of these complaints. But we're still, again, in the beginning of figuring out the appropriate process. But I just want to give you a sense of where the board is heading on this. I know that we heard a lot of the feedback that you all gave, and the rest of the candidates gave during about the last cycle and the new campaign finance requirements. I understand they were onerous in various ways. One way is that there were just too many reports, and I understand that. So we're looking to eliminate potentially one of the reports. I think, like I said, it would be best perhaps if we synchronize the first post-nomination report with the financial disclosure, and then combining combining the pre-election reports into one date, and also pushing back the post-election report. I know under federal law, you don't have to finance or to file your post-election report until a much longer period of time. I think under the code, it's the first Monday after election day, which is, I know it's often time when you want to be taking a break after the difficult election cycle. So we're going to try to reduce the reporting requirements to the extent possible. One thing I know that was confusing in the current code is that the election report don't actually say the report periods. So that, I think there was an oversight, and that's something we're going to have to change. I think it will be something that the report will contain all contributions and expenditures made in the week before the deadline. So basically, the week leading up to the report being due, those contributions and expenditures would not have to be included in the report. And that's just one suggested time period that could change as well. But we're going to clarify that in the report, in the code, and make our recommendations to you for what the best, and work with the city attorney to make the best changes to the code. So we're also looking to give clarity to the code in the charter and all the requirements in a way that is in plain language. So we're going to be preparing guidance information, and there's lots of ways to do this. We want to do a webinar. We want to do maybe multiple webinars. We want to do an FAQ. We'll probably have samples. We're going to try to come up with better stock reports that are the finance reports that are easier to fill out. We're working through a variety of ideas to try to make this whole process a lot easier, and also make it so that we can post the reports more quickly once we've received them from campaigns. I know on the federal level, typically when you submit your campaign finance report to the FEC, it immediately gets posted to the internet so that anyone can just download it and look at it, which I think is great, and something I think we would strive to accomplish here as well. We're also looking at the different requirements that we currently have for the attribution lines and disclaimers. I know there is some confusion. We're going to try to add more clarity to that part of the code. I think foremost, it's mostly going to involve explaining what the code means, what it applies to, what it doesn't apply to here. I think this is really just a public education campaign that the board is going to have to work on for this next cycle. So I think webinars would be great. That was a suggestion we received after the last cycle, where we can answer questions and provide basically any information about the elections here in Tacoma Park. You know, that includes the complaints, all the campaign finance reporting requirements, how to do campaign finance, how to itemize campaign expenditures and disbursements. We should, I think it would be useful to have better public understanding about the voter registration list and how it's can be appropriately used and how it can be inappropriately used. I know under Maryland law right now, there's a little bit of confusion about how it can be accessed. So I think that's something hopefully will be resolved by the next cycle. As well as I think getting a better sense of how the mail-in system works generally. I think the last cycle we were learning as we were going. I think this next cycle we have a much better sense of how the lifespan of a ballot when it gets sent out and then when it gets received and scanned and tabulated. I think having a good explanation to all the candidates, the public, will be important for the next election cycle. And that's all I have. Do you have any questions?
Great. I'm sure there are questions and comments. Thank you, Matt and Curtis. We really appreciate you doing this work, and we understand that you know, there's just two of you right now on the board. I'll kick us off while I'm waiting for my colleagues to raise their hands with a couple of observations and maybe some questions. You know, I do appreciate you looking at the financial reporting that has to be done in terms of frequency, making it clearer. And one of the things that I don't know if you've had the opportunity to look into or could in the future have the board look into is if there's a way to use some kind of a system, electronic system, or some kind of some technology to make it easier for people to either upload receipts and financial reports rather than using the it's not even a spreadsheet. I don't even know what you would call what we use right now. But if that was something that you all might look into, you know, I know many of the campaigns, particularly under COVID, a lot of people were fundraising through websites or other things. They're already connected to PayPal. Like, you know, is there a way of, you know, being able to do reports a little bit easier? So that would be one thing. And I think everything looks great where the direction you're going in. And if there's something to kind of put on possibly a future list of things for the board to consider looking into. I know we've talked about at different times, potentially a public financing system. We've talked about that when we looked at council compensation, which we're going to review again tonight. And I know the last couple of years they've been very busy for the board with moving our elections and with COVID and mail-in and everything. So, but I just kind of want to put that on maybe a future list for the board to consider looking into.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that we have not discussed it yet, but public financing will certainly put it on the agenda for upcoming meetings.
Cool. I think that's all I had. I see Councilman Costick and Dabala have their hands up. Costick first, sorry.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for all of your work on this, and happy to have a few additional members to help spread out the work now for you all. I think this, you know, in general, this direction looks really good to me. I really appreciate your plan to clarify for the financial reports what the reporting period is. I think that would be very helpful. I know for myself, I had assumed it was through the Sunday before that Monday. And so then my treasurer and I were scrambling on that Monday with kids at home during COVID, trying to, you know, work and figure out our finance report in the next, you know, few hours. And so it would be very, very helpful to have there be some gap in between the deadline and the reporting. I also really love the idea of the outreach to candidates and potential candidates in terms of what needs to be done and how to kind of go through this somewhat complicated process of running. And I think one thing I didn't see on the list that I think would be helpful is also kind of outlining some aspects with regard to how you need to set up a bank account and some of the other registration aspects, because when you start looking into it, all the information you find is related to candidates who have to register with the state. And a lot of that doesn't apply to us because we are a municipality. And when you call some of the places, they'll tell you something totally inaccurate because it doesn't apply to us in Tacoma Park. And it can be very confusing when you want to make sure you're doing the right thing to be hearing these different things. And I know for myself too, when I tried to open a bank account, the bank didn't understand that some of those regulations that you have to follow if you're running for governor do not apply when you're running for city council. And so, and some of those things are things we just simply, we don't have the registration of the paperwork because of the structure. So I think just making sure everybody understands that in a really simple way would be so helpful, because we don't want people to not run for these offices because they're afraid of doing something wrong, or they just don't understand how to do it, or to make a mistake when they're, trying hard to do the right thing. So I think adding some of those details would be really, really helpful. I completely agree on the public financing option for the future is something to look into. And then I just had one small clarification question that I'm not sure I was fully understanding. One of your recommendations in the PowerPoint was to move the post-nomination report to the first Monday after the nomination caucus, so it aligns with the financial disclosure reporting deadline. I just wasn't clear, is the post-nomination report, is that a financial report or is that some other kind of report?
It's a financial report. So
Okay.
the post-nomination report is filed the second Monday after the nominating caucus. On the first Monday after the nominating caucus is the campaign or the candidates' financial disclosures.
Okay.
So it's like one report after another report. So one thought was to put those reports together so you file them together. Then you can wait 3-4 weeks and not have to worry about another report immediately coming up.
Great. That makes sense to me. Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate all of this.
Great. Councilman DeBala.
Yes, first of all, thank you to you and to the other Board of Election members for the huge effort you made for a successful election in this year. It was just, in this past year, it was just awesome how well it worked, given that we'd never done it before. It was COVID, et cetera, et cetera. And so these thoughts that you have about tweaking the process and lessons learned are just great and make a whole bunch of sense to me. I also would love to hear your views on public financing. The point of the financial reporting, of course, as you say, when you say, find a way to post this and make it accessible to the public, the point of the financial reporting is to keep people on the straight and narrow. So having 2 reports is great, but having a report that's so soon after the nomination that you haven't had a chance to raise money yet, or so far after the election that it's sort of beside the point. Those are things you might think about in terms of the timing. But the question I wanted to clarify, that you're recommending an all mail-in again, and you mentioned early voting centers as in the last election, and that was the drop boxes in the rec center and the community center. That's what you meant by early voting centers? You didn't mean early voting centers like joining up in Silver Spring, correct?
That's correct. We did have
Just
staff.
making sure.
Yeah, we had staff outside the building who could basically help you fill out a ballot, and you could just drop it right in the box that was there.
Yeah, people love that.
Yeah. So I would hope that we could do something similar to that, but at this point, I don't think we're talking about joining with the county. But that's something again that we're discussing with the.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Just want to make sure that's what you were talking about. That's it for me. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt, sorry.
I just wanted to know, yeah, the challenge certainly of the reporting is exactly, that's the purpose of the reporting, is so that it's made public. That's certainly the challenge. We don't want it to be too onerous to candidates, but we also still want it to be useful to the public so people can see it. So the timing is certainly difficult. And so hopefully we can strike a better balance this next cycle. So.
Great, Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Thanks also for helping make the last election, the last vote, turn out well. I think under the circumstances, it all being new to us, it did turn out well. And so I had a couple of questions and then a few comments to consider. In terms of the election being all mail-in again, I suppose that makes the most sense, all things considered, given where we are. But I do think that there's certain things that are lost from that. And in thinking about it, I think I would say that incumbents have an advantage with that because there's no ability to buttonhole somebody as they're coming in to vote. I think a lot of people do make their decisions about a range of elections based on having an opportunity to talk to candidates or representatives of campaigns. And then the second thing I would say, and several residents brought this to my attention, and the racial equity impact language that's in the material that goes along with the report, it talks about how the turnout was higher everywhere last time, and the turnout really was huge, but there was still a definite swing toward wards 1, 2, and 3 versus wards 4, 5, and 6, probably more than 2 to 1 in terms of the turnout. And I think in the past, when we had had in-person voting not in our local elections, but in the presidential years, the turnout has been really huge, kind of across the board. And so one of the things we really hope to test out with synchronizing our elections was, could we get something similar to that really high turnout by having 2 separate rooms in the same place for the voting? We never really got to quite test that because of COVID. So I just wonder, and I know there's only 2 of you at the moment on the board and so on, but are there any thoughts about whether the exclusively mail-in idea doesn't fully get to some of these racial equity questions, and or if it benefits incumbents? Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. Any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think those are great points that you raise, and there's certainly things that we're thinking about when we certainly thought about in the last election. It is a mail-in election, but there will be opportunities to vote in person. People will be able to vote on election day. So there will just be one voting place as opposed to being able to vote in the different county locations. So that's, of course, something we've discussed in later elections, is whether the board or whether Tacoma Park can join its ballots to the state and county ballots, but that's probably a discussion for later, and there's a lot more things to consider, and there may have to be other changes made to the code for that. But for the mail-in election, people still can come in and vote in person. They can still vote on in person early at the voting center. We're hoping that's the plan, at least. So I think with respect to the inequities and the different turnouts in the different ward areas, that might be best something that the board looks at under a different initiative through other types of voter outreach. So there's going to be mailings, but there have certainly been, and Curtis has been a big proponent of this as well, has been trying to think of new ways to reach out to people, to get more people registered to vote. And I think we're hoping, it's so hard to tell with the coronavirus and all the variants what will be coming up, but that's certainly something we're going to be thinking about a lot. And I'm sorry I didn't really address that during the presentation, but that's something that the board will be working on.
Yeah, and I do remember in the previous election, back when it was just us on the off years, the odd years, there were those early voting sites we had where there was a tent over in the Sligo Creek area. And I thought that really had the effect of bringing in some people who maybe wouldn't have otherwise known about it. And so that, and yes, there will be an in-person voting site, but that's really for people who got their ballot late. That's not a place where there's going to be a ton of politicking going on. So I think those are areas that I would encourage you to think about. And then just a few other comments. I maybe differ with others. I wouldn't say it was burdensome to have to file a lot of financial reports. I think it was burdensome maybe to have to not be able to do it online easily. And I agree it should be easier to do it online and kind of instantly reportable so people in the public could look at it and see. I think it's important not to have a big, huge gap of weeks and weeks. I think it's important to have them fairly close to the election if we can get the immediate posting. So that's one thought. The second thing I would say is in the whole tabulation process, and it was hard with COVID. It was the first time we did it, but and I think the results were there weren't any really, really close elections. So maybe it's less of an issue, but I don't think there was quite the level of transparency and observability of the counting process. We could go online and watch people going around, picking things up and putting them somewhere else and kind of talking to each other. But it wasn't really, we didn't really see the counting as it was happening. So I understand, given everything that was going on, it was a lot to even get done what was done, but I'd like to see some more public and transparent aspect to that. And
I have to, sorry, if you don't mind. I do think that concern and the other concern you had earlier about, your ability to speak directly with voters and have that interaction is something that I think was more limited by the situation with COVID at the time than it was necessarily the, vote by mail election. Hopefully, I can't guarantee you this obviously, but hopefully you'll have more of those opportunities to observe the count more directly, to interact with voters in a more personal manner, just because we will no longer be operating under the same heavy restrictions.
Yeah, and I didn't mean that as a intense criticism as much as just I'd like to see us do more of that in the future. And then just two other things, and I'm sorry if this is taking a long time. Councilmember Kostick mentioned the telling people how to get a bank account and those kinds of things. And I think you need to get an EIN number from the federal government. And there's a few sort of first steps that if you don't do them in the right order, could slow things down. And it's a relatively short campaign season. So I think having beyond even the city specific things, just here's kind of what you need to just set up your campaign. Not whether or not you need a website. People can decide that for themselves and how they want to do it. But there are certain steps that you really, if you don't do, you can't even get it off the ground. And I think for someone who's wondering, is this something I want to do or not, listing that would be helpful. And then the last thing I'll just say is, and I don't know if you thought about this at all, but we did adopt a change last year. I had mixed feelings about it, but we adopted it. We said that people who want to run have to register, but people who want to influence the election or groups that want to are also supposed to register. I'm pretty sure, based on what Jesse Carpenter said, no one and no group, and there was no registration of any kind other than the candidates. But there were certainly people who were, or groups trying to influence the election. It's fine, they should be able to. If we're going to require that, and maybe we shouldn't require it, but if we're going to require it, we ought to see that it happens. And so I just plant that last seed.
Yeah, that I agree, Councilmember, that language needs to be clarified and narrowed. The way it's currently written, it's just too broad.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Searcy.
Hey, thank you all so much for all of your work. I know that when you're down to just two people and you're tackling something as complicated as our, election policies, that is a tremendous deed. So thank you all so much for doing that. I do want to kind of pick up on one point that Councilmember Kovar raised about equity and how, the vote by mail worked in the city versus things such as, matching our election with the federal election process. And I think one of the things that's really key is to register to vote, there are multiple vehicles for doing that, and usually it's incorporated as part of an action that most people will typically do. You're going to get your driver's license renewed, those kinds of things. And what I saw during the last election season was our inability to access the multifamily buildings was really, really key. There were a number of people that, rightfully because of COVID and a number of other things, were not as aware or familiar with our election process. They weren't necessarily registered in the city to vote. They received somewhat limited information about our campaigns that were happening. And so therefore, they wouldn't necessarily receive a ballot in the mail, right? So one of the things that we will definitely need to think about is kind of shifting our outreach and putting a heavy emphasis on multifamily buildings and gaining access to those multifamily buildings to make sure that we're able to register folks in those buildings early enough so that they would be able to receive those the ballots. And so that was something that really stood out for me, and I think was somewhat challenging, especially in those wards where you have a large proportion of your constituency that resides in multifamily buildings. So if you can't get in the buildings and they don't know what's going on and they're not registered to vote, they're not going to get the ballots. So I think that's something, working in conjunction with the city clerk, if we really are trying to make some inroads in terms of increased voter turnout and equity, really looking at how access to multifamily buildings are handled in the city, I think is one focused area that I think could have large impact.
I completely agree, council member. And I think that some of that might have to be addressed by code revisions, but Jesse might correct me, but that's certainly something that was a concern during the 2020 cycle, and that we're certainly thinking about going forward about how we can make better access, how people can have better access to those buildings, those spaces.
If I can weigh in on this quickly. So our code is quite progressive in that it does require candidates to be able to access multifamily buildings for electoral purposes. With COVID, it was difficult, though, because it was questionable whether people wanted strangers in their building going door to door. I would certainly hope that in the next election, it's something that we can really make sure people are aware of, with working with Grace and reaching out to all the multifamily buildings, making sure that property owners and property managers are aware that we have this requirement that candidates with proper notice are supposed to be able to access buildings at election time, once they are actually candidates for the election. So it's definitely something to pursue and educate on. I think our law covers it. It's just with COVID, it was particularly difficult to enforce it.
Yeah, but I also think that having, voter registration drives outside of those buildings to get them registered early enough so that they would get those ballots in the mail. Because, it's one thing for me to be handing out my information. I'm fine with doing that. I will figure out a way to get in a building. But I think the thing that was a little challenging, and I don't know how this policy works, is, I was under the impression that I should not be trying to register voters, right? That I'm giving my information out for them to vote, but I should not also be giving them like forms and this is how you register. To me, that just kind of seems weird and probably completely unethical. So, how do we make sure that we're doing the necessary due diligence so that multifamily residents we're putting in that extra effort to get them registered to vote early, I think is also a big piece.
Yeah, really good points. Right.
Yeah. And I think sorry, Councilwoman Searcy, are you done? I was gonna.
Yep, I'm done. I'm lowering my hand.
I was just gonna say, I know we've been talking about, and, with the ARPA dollars and a lot of other things, doing more and more community outreach. And I just think, it's never, I don't think it really is ever too early to start like really adding in there about voting and registering, given that we have elections every 2 years in the city. So that just might be something to also keep in mind as we're doing that. And I know, we did such a great effort with the census and really pushing that out there. So I'm wondering if there's some lessons learned we could have with how we did the census work. And I know you all tried really hard, and COVID was a huge barrier. And in prior years, you had done a lot of outreach and voter registration on things. I think just another point, and then I'll turn to Councilmember Smith, is that a couple of election cycles ago, Cheer did a series of election forums in many of the apartment buildings, probably not all of them, but there were a lot. And so I do think, maybe working with some of nonprofits or other groups in the community, I think those also help to increase interest in the elections and awareness. So, Councilmember Smith.
Thank you guys for the 2 members of the board for being here this evening. One thing that I would say about registering voters, I think that there is a missed opportunity from the staff level that during the downtime of the elections, like immediately following the election, there isn't significant, robust outreach to residents, primarily those that live in the apartment buildings, to host workshops so that people understand the process. Because when election time rolls around, as a candidate, you're not just trying to drop lit, knock on doors, but you're also in this weird mode of educating people on Takoma Park's voting process. I don't think that's an ethical situation. I just think that in our small municipal elections, it's a capacity issue. I mean, you just do not have the resources to not just in a traditional campaign, drop lit, knock on doors, approve social media ads, and at the same time, register or explain to people how they register to vote in Takoma Park's elections. So it'd be great if, I don't care if it's the Board of Elections or Community Development Office, Housing and Community Development, there needs to be regular stakeholder meetings with people that live in the apartments so they understand the process. And those people that are undocumented, they get comfortable, register to vote, and know when the election is and how they can actually put their signed ballots in either a drop box or come to the community room and participate in this process. And the other question I have, I guess that's not so much a question, that was just a statement. But the question I have is, I hope the board can explain to me, we have this new regulation that organizations are supposed to file if they are engaged in campaigning or supporting candidates. But what happens if a 50C3 senior leadership or executive director, if they are campaigning for any candidates? I'm doing a fellowship at a organization that has a 50C3 and a 50C4, and actual campaigning is just like a huge no-no on the 50C3 side of the organization. But I feel like in our elections, there's a pass given to organizations, certain leaders of these organizations, to get involved in our elections.
So you're asking about 501c3 organizations, like nonprofits?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so I don't think I mean, Jesse could step in here and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the code covers anything with respect to those groups other than the catch-all of groups that should be registering if they seek to influence. I think the intention, I mean, this is a city code, so my interpretation at least is that it's meant to capture like a group that is organized with the specific purpose of getting someone elected, with the specific purpose of influencing election on a referendum, just so that people, the public, can know what those groups are spending money on. If there's an ad, you know, attacking or supporting someone, that people are going to ask, well, what is this ad from? And in order for us to put an attribution or, you know, a disclosure line on that, it needs to be a group that's registered with the city. So I don't think the specifically with respect to the 501c3s, I don't think there's a difference. There might be under federal law or state law, but under Tacoma Park law, I don't think they're treated differently. But with respect to your first point, I definitely 100% agree with you that there needs to be a significant, robust outreach to multifamily houses, and I think stakeholder meetings are a wonderful idea, and that's certainly going to be a top priority of the board once we get to full strength in our next meeting next month. Sorry, I hope that answered your question, Councilmember.
So I thought the federal regulation applied to all campaigns, not just federal or state campaigns.
I would have to look at it. I couldn't tell you one way or another. I'm sorry. Well, in either case, the Tacoma Board of Elections is not empowered to enforce federal regulations. So, but I'm happy to look at it for you and try to find out.
I hope that we can. I mean, it just seems like this weird loophole that organizations can, especially those organizations that actually get grant funding from the city, participate in our elections.
That's a good point, Councilmember. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Costick?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry to double raise my hand, but I just wanted to follow up again on the discussion a little bit earlier about access to multifamily buildings, because I think particularly for some of the smaller buildings where we don't necessarily have a great connection with the property owner or the management company, I think it can be really hard to build those connections and get access. I know there are a couple of properties in my ward where that has been the case. And I've wanted even just to, after being elected, kind of go in and make sure I could, tell people about a neighborhood association meeting or just try to, engage with people a little bit. And I think the kind of building up the connections between the city and those landlords might be useful, because I tried to reach out and didn't get any response, and it was just, there was no way to kind of follow up as a result. So I think that is kind of the missing link, and it would be great to build on that a little bit more. So just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Yeah, that's certainly something we can look at and build on. I think it's a good idea.
Terrific. And I'll just, and I'm not sure if I may have misheard Councilmember Kovar before, but I will say as someone who ran the last election in a contested election, the election day itself that you did have in-person voting, that I feel like I was out there all day talking to voters. So I do think it was a day that it may be the difference of being in a contested election and a non-contested, but I don't know if I heard Councilmember Kovar incorrectly, but I wanted to say that day I felt like wasn't like an almost normal election day in terms of greeting people who were voting and talking to them about things. So I'm glad
just to respond. I mean, I would say yes, that definitely exists, but the percentage of people who voted in that way was relatively small compared to the total number who voted. That's all. So yeah, it was a great opportunity to make that contact, but the vast majority of people weren't doing that.
Right, but we know if we don't do mail-in voting, we're not going to get that many people voting, period. So yeah, I think there are some trade-offs, but sorry, I didn't know if I heard him correctly, but wanted to give the board the perspective of somebody who had run in a contested election and what that election day was like for me. And so I thought I talked to a lot of voters that day. Councilman DeBala?
Yeah, following on that point, when the full board convenes, maybe not just for the election board that was involved in running the election, but for the 5 people joining you who were voting, what was the impact of COVID? Because it may be that who voted the day of and who voted by Dropbox and actually physically showed up versus just put it in the mailbox may have something to do with COVID, and there may be more people doing Dropbox and showing up in person on election day. And then you'd want to be ready for that. So that might just be a conversation you all want to have.
I just want to note there are definitely strengths with a mail-in election for candidates. And I think in a perfect world, if we had an up to like a contemporaneous ballot tracking, candidates, if we can work out a process for them to have quick access to the updated voter registration lists, candidates would know which voters have voted and which voters haven't voted. And that's very powerful as a candidate because you don't duplicate efforts contacting people who already voted. So that's something we're certainly looking at. We want to make sure we build the system to make sure that works, but that's something we would like to educate candidates going forward.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to imply that. I think the mail-in approach is the way to go. I didn't mean to imply not. I just, in response to this discussion about who shows up on election day. And I love that idea of getting relatively current updates on who's voted and who hasn't. That really would be helpful if there's a way to do that, if it's not too onerous. That's up to you.
Great. All right. Well, I know on the list of legislative priorities, one of the things is combining our elections with the state ballot. So I think we can have that conversation as we now transition into legislative priorities, our next work session. I want to thank our Board of Elections, or the 2 of you, Matt and Curtis. Thank you so much for all this work. I hope this work session was helpful to you as you're taking back the information and going to meet with the new board members. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. All right, next we'll move to our legislative priorities, and is Ann with us?
Yes, and I'll kick it off, Mayor,
Yep.
and turn it on to Ann. So, Mayor, members of council, every year, the city of Tacoma Park monitors the public policy activities that take place at the state level and the impact at the city and on our residents. And annually, we develop a list of those priorities in advance of the next General Assembly session that will take place January 12th in 2022. And that's the same day that council will be coming back from your winter recess. And our hope tonight will be able to develop city-specific priorities, include support of MML priorities, and bring back before you a final list to be adopted by council. And that list of priorities be shared with the D20 legislative leaders, as well as other state leaders at the state level. And as a reminder, council, as been stated several times tonight, council has the joint session with D20 joint meeting December 1st. And tonight we have with us our state legislative consultant, Ann, with Public Policy Partners. And Ann is going to also introduce, we have an associate from her team with us tonight as well, Suhani, who will walk us through the presentation. So Ann and Suhani, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, City Manager Fox. I appreciate it. Folks, I haven't seen you in a while, so hi, good to see you all. Happy to be here tonight to review with you what is a draft of priorities for the city. There's a lot going on. It's a lengthy list. Just as a reminder, as we get closer to the 2022 session, things will get a little better defined. We will know, some potentially additional pieces of legislation that we expect to see. There may be some things that we're told no, especially in an election year, may not be happening. So there will be some. So a number of the items on the list are things that we either know for sure or we're pretty sure are coming, and some of them are without every detail. But those things will come as we see legislative drafts and bills as they get introduced, of course, in January. So we'll be reviewing that for you. I'm very happy to be joined by Suhani Chitalia, who joined Public Policy Partners back in January. And you'll see her from time to time at these meetings and some of our other meetings, helping out with some work. She's got a background in environmental justice, environmental law. And so I think that Councilmember Dabala will especially be happy to work a bit with Suhani for the coming session. And then the other thing I just wanted to briefly mention, because I know this is going to come up in questions anyway, is about what to expect, both in terms of the in-person or virtual nature of the 2022 session, and then is there or is there not going to be a special session? So the answer to the first question about how session will work in 2022, we don't know for sure yet. I have been feeling more confident based on all the conversations I'm having with legislators that I think we might have a bit of a hybrid where the legislators will be in Annapolis a lot. Those of us doing the lobbying will be in Annapolis a lot. But I think a lot of the hearings, the bill hearings, will still happen virtually. So that's just, October's guess. So we'll have to see. Obviously, COVID numbers will also have a major role in determining what they finally decide to do. As for a special session, it is all but official. So it is not official yet, but it's all but official that they will be convening in early December and take up the issue of congressional redistricting. The legislative redistricting won't happen until the regular session, but they think that they can address the congressional maps before session. So that's the intro part. And now I think I get to share my screen and start the slideshow. All righty, I'm going to move my other little box here so that I can see what we've written. And then Jamal, I don't know, do you want to, or I'm sorry, Mayor, do you want to entertain questions as we go, or do you want me to get through this and then open it up?
It's probably best you get through it,
Okay.
Anne, and then we'll go back for questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Where won't you go? There we go. All right. So obviously, anything that is related to providing continued support and assistance related to the recovery efforts from COVID are top of mind. And so a lot of that may be related to housing and housing needs. Some will be about what kind of direct aid it still may be coming either from the federal government or from the state government. And that may be to businesses, to individuals, to families, and it may be for things like housing and food security, those things. And then continuing to have a priority related to affordable and energy efficient housing. We are expecting legislation to come back from Delegate Charkoudian related to having energy efficiency standards for low-income housing. We all may remember that there was a climate solutions bill that came close to passing last session. Bits of it had passed. We are expecting some version of it to return. And so that's where there may be some of these housing efficiency standards included in that. Also related to housing, we've had a bill in for a couple of years around the collection of eviction data to really help inform community development efforts, as well as where there needs to be focus on rental assistance or other kinds of interventions. Delegate Janelle Wilkins will again introduce just cause legislation. It might look a little different this year, but we'll be certainly continuing strong support for that. The next one is again Delegate Charkoudian's bill around energy efficiency buildings. And then again, related to eviction prevention, there have been various initiatives the last few years around shielding court records related to failure to pay rent cases. And it's something that is used from time to time to deny leases to potential tenants. And there's a growing effort actually across the country to look at how to minimize that as a barrier to housing. I'm going to turn, excuse me, turn this one over to Suhani to talk about the items on this slide.
Hello, everyone. It's great to virtually see everyone for the first time. I'll just touch on some of kind of the larger environmental pieces of legislation we'll keep an eye out for. Obviously, a top priority is going to be climate change. We're seeing a new version of the Climate Solutions Now Act. As Anne mentioned, it will definitely touch on housing. Right now, there's currently a debate on whether it's going to be one large omnibus bill or whether it's going to be broken up into 2 to 3 different types of bills. So it might include something like climate as one, housing and transportation as others. That is just still yet to be seen. There's discussions going across the Senate and House on kind of how it will be structured. We're probably going to see more zero emission vehicle bills pop up, public transit, and decarbonizing transportation. And along with the Climate Solutions Now Act, there will probably be some supportive bills that will discuss just how local and municipal regions can meet larger climate and mitigation adaptation goals. In addition, Delegate Fisher is also bringing back the Environmental Human Rights Amendment, which would establish the environment and the protection of the environment as a human right for all Marylanders.
Thank you, Suhani. While police reform was a major issue during the 2021 legislative session, we do expect to see legislation again. I think we'll probably see a mix of some tweaks to what did pass. And then I think there probably will be some other attempts to make some bigger changes as well. And so based on, what I think the city's done in its discussions around reimagining public safety, we'll be looking at the various bills based on some of the work. And I think the Mayor Stewart, you mentioned some recommendations coming from the task force. And then one of the other very big pieces that just has grown substantially in terms of people talking about is removing police from interventions when somebody is having a behavioral health crisis. And this is both for people who are having mental health crises and trying to have more of an intervention by clinicians. It's also about overdoses. and trying to reduce police presence in overdose scenes that automatically get defined as crime scenes. And the focus on public health is sometimes lost. So there's just, I think we're going to see multiple bills, multiple budget initiatives potentially on that particular issue. And then this last slide has kind of the other things that a lot of which are continuing priorities for the city. But certainly anything related to Purple Line, and not just certainly the Purple Line itself, but the efforts to support the communities impacted by the construction. As always, looking for creative ways for municipalities to be able to generate revenue outside of property taxes. Continue toward the goal of Vision Zero for pedestrian safety. There will be a very strong effort this year to legalize recreational adult use of cannabis. And some of you may be aware that it was in the past few months that the House Speaker, Adrian Jones, expressed support for the passing of a constitutional amendment that would put the issue directly to the voters next November. So I think that there's a very high chance for that to pass. And I think that there's going to be a lot of discussion around how to address a number of inequities related to the historic war on drugs, and ensuring that in the marketplace that communities of color have equitable access to licenses, and that there's a reinvestment in communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the many years of putting people in jail. So that's going to be, I think, a pretty significant issue this session. And then finally, this is a nice kind of way to end it, because that's how the mayor started the conversation about efforts to consolidate the election ballots. And I'll just say that that's one area where at the moment we're not sure about what exactly the legislation is going to look like. I know that Delegate Moon has been in conversations with the city staff about what that should look like and how to continue to move forward on that, but it remains as a priority.
Great. Thank you very much for that presentation. I will open it up to see if my colleagues have any questions. We will be voting on a resolution on, I lost the look ahead soon on council priorities. And I think in terms of moving forward with this legislative session, we will continue with what the practice we've had in the past of having a council subcommittee work on this. Councilmember Kovar and Davala and myself have volunteered ourselves to continue to do that as we have the last few years. If anyone on the council would like to swap in, please let us know. You can email me directly, but at the moment, those are the folks who have volunteered to do it again. And I know last year we had, I don't know if I've ever had I can't find the final document, but we did do a document that was, sort of legislative subcommittee policies and how the criteria we were using to look at bills and the priorities the city council had identified. And I think it would be good to revise that for the upcoming legislative session if we could. And for some reasons, I can only find drafts in my email. I'm sure it lives somewhere. It's probably on the city website, but I think that was a helpful document for the subcommittee to review, have a set criteria that was shared with the full council, that was shared with the public on how we're reviewing legislation that passes our way.
Absolutely.
Great. I'll pass it to Councilmember Kovar first.
Yeah, thanks for the compiling all the information. I thought it was very helpful. One question, an item that's not on there, and I just wonder, Ann, maybe what you think about it. We've had in the past the statewide sanctuary law is something that we were striving for. Is that something you think it makes sense for us to have? Is it likely to come up? Do we know anything about that?
So I will find out. Certainly Delegate Moon and Senator Smith have been champions of various pieces of legislation on that topic. And I'll find out what they think. I think one of the things to add about the special session is that it's at that time that the legislature will take up any veto overrides. And there was a bill that Delegate Moon did a great job being the floor leader on during the legislative session related to immigrants and police and people being able to be held by police that the governor vetoed. And the last I heard, I think that will be overridden. So I think that in terms of any support that's needed, we know that the D20 team is going to be supportive, but it will, as we get a little closer and the leadership of the House and Senate make decisions on what bills for sure they're going to put on an override list, we'll make sure if that's there, we're providing the proper support for that. But in the meantime, I'll also find out what other bills are being looked at for the coming session.
Okay, and the only other thing I thought was interesting particularly interesting in what you presented was the idea of state financial assistance, if I understood it correctly, for local governments undertaking climate change related projects or work. And is that something that's specifically out there or more of an idea that you think makes sense, or where does that fall in that sense?
So honey, if you have any details on that, I think that there have been embedded in certain proposals some idea of providing assistance. So not sort of just a separate initiative, here's money to do this stuff, but embedded in some of the proposals, legislative proposals, there's been some aid provided for in that. So I think that's where that comment comes from.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Smith.
And thank you for your presentation, and I want to welcome your new colleague to our meeting. One thing I didn't see on your presentation is reparations. The state of California has recently passed legislation for a reparations committee. Other states are looking at it, and I'm working on it at the federal level on HR 40, the reparations bill. Can you just give me some insight on, do you think that we will see a reparations bill come out of the next session of the General Assembly?
I have not heard folks talking about that. So that does not mean that it isn't, on people's list. It's not been something that has been, in any of the conversations I've had with folks, any of the presentations I've heard from legislators or anything like that. Now, with that said, remembering this is an election year, gubernatorial election year, it is a time when people it's a time, it's a two-sided coin. There are times that people want to make some bold statements and put out there in order to raise the profile of the discussion, bold initiatives. And at the same time, and I have way too many of these conversations. It was like, oh, well, yeah, no, that's a good idea. And yeah, we want to do that, but no, not in an election year, not with. So I think reparations might fit in the former category, not the latter. But I will start making some direct asks about that. There, are certainly a number of key legislators who have worked on similar related issues, and so I will absolutely find that out.
Excellent. On HR 40, Maryland Municipal League once again has made that the league's priority. Have you heard anything from the governor's office if he's supportive of this HR 40 push? Oh, I'm sorry, the HUR. I got HR 40 on my brain.
Highway user, thank you. I'm sorry. When you said that, I was like, I sure haven't. I've not heard anything recently from the governor on that. The governor has a really wonderful communications team that puts out very specific things when related to all kind of, he has all of that. So I've not heard him specifically address highway user fund revenue at this point.
Okay.
It is again something to be raising. There, a lot of the legislative committees, the budget committees are starting to have more hearings. They're going to be talking about spending affordability. They're going to be talking about both capital and operating budget growth, and all. So I think a lot of that's going to come up. So I'm glad you raised it. I'll certainly make sure that it is on the that it gets it'll probably come up anyway, but make sure that it gets asked by legislators in some of the upcoming budget meetings.
Excellent, because as you know, the last time was a few sessions back. The governor was the one who led the case for municipalities getting more money through HUR. So I think if he did the same, it would increase the probability of it happening.
That's one of the things that fits in really well in an election year, I think, just politically speaking.
Right. And then you talked about some tenant potential bills. Has anyone talked about trying to strengthen condo associations, making sure that their books are clean, and figuring out a way to make sure they don't get into trouble, where you have these situations where the condo fee is almost as much as the rent in some situations, or the money that residents in that condo building think that's in reserves for whatever reason has disappeared.
And fees and all. That has not been something that I've spent a lot of time on. I am aware of some of the legislators who generally introduce those bills. A couple of the leaders from the House Environment and Transportation Committee who are from Prince George's County, I know, always have those kinds of bills in. So I'm happy to reach out to them and ask them what's on their radar for this year. I guess my question then back to you though is it something that is there a specific policy change that the city is interested in seeing related to how condo associations work and the accountability as you've talked about?
I think the big issue is transparency, right? Because there are different levels of government that are involved in it, where you register the association, who do you disclose the information to? And there are only 157 municipalities in townships or legal jurisdictions in Maryland. Municipalities, I think, are at the bottom of the food chain when it comes to actually knowing what's going on in these condo associations. So I think, requiring the reporting going out to all levels of government would be important. And making sure that maybe they need to disclose or do make sure that there are audited financials at least a couple times, every 5 years or whatever. But I think transparency is the first thing that we need to bring into managing these condo associations.
I'll dig around.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
Councilwoman Searcy.
Great. Thank you both so much. This is a great presentation. So a question I have is more or less around now that things like the ARP dollars have gone, from the state to localities and everyone's received these large influxes of dollars. Has there, and that I believe that happened between sessions, right? Has there been any conversations around other types of supports to people as a result of COVID still, despite receiving those influx of dollars? So things like new state child tax credits or business tax credits, or are you hearing anything about any kind of tax incentives that people may be considering due to COVID, given that we've gotten all this money to come in and people are still suffering?
That's a really interesting question. I can't say that I've heard anything sort of tying tax credits as aid in response to the pandemic. So what a lot of the conversations that I'm hearing are about how there are a lot of folks interested in how we capture some of the unspent. There's still a large amount of federal dollars hasn't been spent. We know that there's a large surplus of state dollars as well, and the governor wants to put a great deal of it in reserves. And so, there's a lot of discussion about the ability to influence how some of that money gets spent, where it gets invested. I know that there's been a little more discussion around, again, not specific to COVID, but I've heard some discussions, especially around, like biotech industry and things like that. But just because I heard that doesn't mean that's all that's being talked about. So, and in terms of child care tax credit, I will absolutely reach out about that. I've not heard. I've been hearing some of the other legislative efforts that I know are happening around trying to establish family medical leave at the state level, and I've not heard anybody specifically talking about the child care tax credit. So I'll start asking a little more about that.
Yeah, I would be interested in hearing about whether or not folks are talking about, any tax credits on the individual family kind of level, but also any business types of tax credits. Because I recognize that folks got a lot of money, and I know that states are struggling to spend the large influxes of dollars that have been received, and I'm just trying to think of, what are some novel approaches to try to make sure that you're kind of giving some relief to the people who need it, given some of the challenges with infrastructure. We're trying to get a lot of these programs up and running and out the door.
I think you're absolutely right. And I imagine there's going to be 100 proposals on how to try to make some of that happen, but trying to get a handle on, what some specific proposals are going to be to bring to the city council for consideration. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Sorry, Councilman Costa.
just want to reiterate, first of all, my thank you to both of you for the presentation and all the information. I just had a couple of quick things. One, with regard to your note about Vision Zero, the Transportation Planning Board met today and we received our quarterly reports from the DOTs about their efforts towards safety improvements. And I do think this may be a good time to have some discussions at the state level about safety on our roadways, because the level of fatalities, not just in Maryland, but in all 3 jurisdictions that are a part of the TBB and really nationally, during 2020 was way up due to reduction in traffic and faster speeds and some more reckless driving. So there were higher numbers of fatalities this last year in Maryland, and about a fourth of the total fatalities, which were over 500, were pedestrians and bicyclists. So I think just that kind of underscores that aspect that might be something that people will want to focus on at this time. My other question was with regard to anything happening on workforce development. And I think we talked a little bit previously, or asked a question previously about also specifically on any kind of efforts with regard to improved licensure for foreign trained immigrants who come in with, engineering degrees or health degrees or other degrees to be able to kind of move into that field rather than have to go through really onerous steps to be able to get recertified in the United States. And I've heard that there is an impending shortage of medical doctors and healthcare professionals and some others that could potentially be filled by some of the immigrants we have who have that training but aren't certified in the US. So just wondering if there have been any discussions on that as well.
General workforce development, I've heard a few things. Specifically, the governor is going to be, I think he's announced, I don't know how broadly it's been announced yet. He's going to be starting another apprenticeship program. I have heard there are efforts to look at the workforce shortage tuition assistance grant program that the Maryland Higher Education Commission oversees. They oversee a bunch of grant programs and loan repayment programs. That there's a push, I hear it especially coming from the behavioral health field, trying to get more assistance to try to get more social workers and counselors into the field. I have not heard the specific issue that you've raised about professionals coming in from out of the country. I know that there have been efforts in the past to the health occupations, specifically health occupations in Maryland, have they all are different. They all have different boards and different rules and different requirements and standards and all. Some have reciprocity with other states so that people don't have to go through everything to get, to be a social worker in one state, be a social worker in our state. I have to be honest, I've not heard anybody talking about that specific to people coming in from other countries. So I'll start asking folks about that just to see if that's, I guess there's a part of me that wonders, I'm not, this is new, so I don't know how much of that can be governed by the state, how much of it can be has to be addressed by individual health occupation boards or other licensing boards, and what can be done at a federal level. So, we can start looking into that.
Thank you. I think there is a federal bill. I'm not sure if it's focused specifically on healthcare, but there is a federal bill that's looking at some of that. But I do think there are some states that have done, particularly during the pandemic, like expedited medical licensure for people who are trained doctors with foreign degrees or experience. And I don't know that Maryland was one of them, but I think there are some. So just an interesting thing, because we do have residents who come in, you know, with a great deal of experience and then sometimes can't utilize that. So thank you.
Sure.
Councilwoman Devala.
Yes, thank you. That was a really interesting question, and some of those doctors live in Ward 2. I had two things on my list, and one was was whether the special session, they're both about the special session, whether the special session was going to discuss state ARPA funding, and I think you answered that already. And the second question was about the redistricting, both in the special session and in the January session. And so will you, do you have any more comments about ARPA, and will you be letting us know when the city should be commenting on the state redistricting maps? And I bring that up because we just looked at the county redistricting maps, and surprise, surprise, Tacoma Park was sliced in half. So we don't like that, no surprise. And we'd like to, I think we would like to be alerted if you find that there's a serious option being considered that does that. So two comments, I'll wait for your response. And welcome to Suhani. I'm really looking forward to working with you.
So on the ARPA funds, I mean, that's, you know, all the budgeting stuff happens, you know, the governor for one more year, because this will change, because as voters, we changed this last November. But for one more year, the governor gets almost total control over the budget. So, you know, the way that the legislature influences how the money gets spent, whether it's state dollars or federal dollars, is by negotiating and sometimes by, you know, mandating where they can. You know, I think there's a lot more success with the negotiating tactic than the mandating tactic, but he still does get to decide overwhelmingly where the money gets spent. There, as I was talking about some of the budget hearings, the budget committees meeting, and this is just the usual time of the year when they are meeting to get a better picture of what is going on with the federal dollars, with all dollars. But obviously right now there's a lot more attention being paid to where the federal dollars have gone, what's still left. And so that's not specific to the special session. That's stuff that's just going to be ongoing and will certainly be a very large topic. The budget's always a big issue, but I've been talking to some folks who, you know, are sort of the same mind that I am, that sometimes the budget actually is more difficult to deal with when there's money as opposed to when there's not. So there's a little bit of a balancing act there. And then as for redistricting, I think I just saw something today from the governor's office seeking comment on the latest drafts that are out there. Remember, we've got the governor has a redistricting committee, and then the legislature has a redistricting committee. So, you know, we'll see lots of versions of things. I haven't looked at what came out, the email that I saw today. So, so absolutely, we will keep an eye on that. We'll share when I'll forward the email that I got today. And we'll be keeping an eye on that. I mean, I think we generally believe they try not to, as the early draft, I guess, of the councilmanic districts proved, you can never say never. It's the exception to the rule. But generally, they're pretty good about keeping the municipalities together. So, but we'll keep a very special eye on that.
Great. Anything else, Councilwoman Devala? Oh, all right. So I think we've raised a number of things. I wanted to go back because I know on your slide you talked about marijuana legalization is one of the things. And when Councilmember Smith mentioned reparations, I just want to note in Evanston, Illinois, the city there, they actually passed a couple of years ago reparations and using the sale of marijuana to fund the reparations. And then Suhani, you're right, nodding your head. Have you heard of this? And then I think it was just this past, when they first passed it, they didn't exactly know how they were going to do this or how the money was going to go into it. And I think in just the last 8 months, they've started a housing affordability program. So the money goes into down payment assistance programs and other things to address the generational wealth gap. And they've figured out the criteria for the people who can receive that. So I just wanted to raise that as, something as when you are talking and looking at if there may be any support for that, because I know sometimes when you raise the issue of and talk about reparations, people ask where you're going to get the money from. And so if marijuana legalization is being talked about, I know in the past, sometimes people have talked about using that money on education or other things. So just wanted to kind of put that out there on what they're doing in Evanston, Illinois. The other thing is on November 15th, that is the time when we go before the Montgomery County delegation to discuss our priorities. So as a council, usually we don't, I think I get 3 minutes to do that. So we usually pick 2 or 3 things to really highlight our bills. So that's just a date that's coming up for us. And so I guess what I would ask my colleagues is to look over this presentation, think about, and we will be voting on a resolution on our council priorities. If there's anything that needs to be changed, added to it, or tweaked, we should do that. And Anne and Suhani, if based on the conversation we had tonight, if you have any other recommendations on things that you think we should put in that resolution to document our priorities for the upcoming legislative session, please let us know. I think anything you all need from us?
I don't think so right now, but things are just ramping up. So be ready.
It's getting exciting. All right. Well, we'll see. I don't know. I think Just Cause may get more of a spotlight. Many of the gubernatorial candidates talked about it at the Renters Alliance Forum. So maybe this is the year. We can hope. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I have a feeling we're going to start seeing a lot more of you.
I hope so.
Great. Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thank you all.
What's left of it. Terrific. All right. Tracy, I think, is coming back. Ms. Smith, are you with us? Yes. Terrific. We are continuing the conversation. Was it just last week? I think our work session on council compensation. Again, thank you for the excellent presentation. The last time it was, we were presented with 3 options that you presented us with. 2 of them increased the council's compensation and the coverage for benefits. And a third was to pretty much just keep the status quo. The sense of council last week was one of the 2 options that increased compensation, and the benefits was the direction council wanted to go in, but there was not a clear commitment to either option A or B. A number of council members asked Ms. Smith for you to present some additional information on impact on the budget. And so I will turn it over to you to do that.
Okay. Is the PowerPoint ready to pull up? I believe. Okay, so if you go to the next slide. So as you said, that is the wrong presentation, but that's okay. I can give you the information anyway. So the two main options that I presented that you were most interested in last week were the increase to the salary levels and the increase to the insurance benefit. Looking at the current, I'll send the presentation to you so you can have the numbers in front of you. But looking at the current salary level as it stands today with the benefits that the current council is using, if you adjust it up by what I assumed was a 2% ECI for next year, the approximate cost of current salary levels would be $90,000 as they stand today. Looking at the two options, the first one was to increase the salary level to $20,000 and $16,000 instead of, currently it's 15 and 11. So moving it up to 20,000 and 16,000. As it stands today is about 120,000. So it's about a $30,000 increase. Can you go to the second slide and let's see if this is the correct? Yep. Okay. So that shows the $90,000 current estimation for next year. So if you could flip to the next slide. There we go. So option one is, as I said, moving it up to 20,000 and 16,000. So the trick here is that we don't know what benefit levels the future council is going to choose. So in each of these options, I made the insurance level the same, exactly the same as what the current council has. And then the middle option is if half the council picked spousal coverage, and then the last option is if the entire council picked family coverage, because you never know which council members are going to need what benefit coverage. So these options, option one for 120, 185, and then 275,000, those are the salary levels of 20,000 and 16,000 with those different benefit variables in there. So again, the current cost as it stands today is would be next year, 90,000. So it'd be about a $30,000 increase if everybody stayed the same benefit level as what the current council has. And then additionally for the 185 and 275 would be the max if full family coverage happened for every council member. Then the second option two had the salary levels at what the compensation committee had recommended, which is the higher salary levels as well at 32,000 and 24,000. Both of these have the same going up to the full-time equivalent of insurance benefits so that it's the 80-20 split for spousal or family coverage. So this option two is about double. So it's 180,000 as the council benefits stand today. And then an additional up to 245 or 335 for the maximum if everybody picked family coverage of insurance. So I know it's a huge range to look at. It's a little bit of a guessing game, an estimation whenever you're trying to forecast, especially benefit levels, because you never know, even if the same people are on council, you don't know what insurance levels could potentially change from year to year. So I usually estimate about in the middle for insurance coverage when I'm forecasting out salary and benefits. The second thing I will say that you had asked me about.
Can I just?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Clarifying question here.
Yes.
So that the reason that the two sets of healthcare numbers are different is because they're both 80-20.
Both of these are the same full-time equivalent of 80-20.
Thank you.
Correct.
And I
Yes.
think you're about to get to the right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Sorry. Does anybody else have a question on these specific
Tracy,
numbers?
could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding your chart here correctly, and I apologize if I don't. So you said the current total cost, I think, right, of pay and benefits for the council is about $90,000, right?
I estimated that up if we took the current salary level adjusted by what I am assuming
Yeah, right.
an
But
estimated
so
ECIS.
around 90,000. So then the cost equivalent is, we should compare that to about 90,000, is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
correct. That would, yes. So the 90,000, if everything stayed the same with insurance, if the council had the exact same insurance, it would be either 120,000 or the 180,000 with the higher salary level. If that makes sense.
No.
So that's a little bit,
Say
that's a
that
little bit
again.
more
Can
apples
you
to
say that
apples.
again? Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the current numbers would be 90,000. If you're looking at an apples to apples comparison with the same benefit level, it would be for option one would be the 120, or the option two would be 180. If that makes sense. So the top row of each option is what you should compare the current $90,000 package to.
And I'm sorry, so following on that.
Yes.
So the current, just to repeat for everybody.
Yes.
Current healthcare coverage for council is what?
So there's currently
Not zero.
No, there's currently, and I put it all together, the salary and benefits. So there's currently, of the 7 of you, there's currently 2 that are selecting insurance benefits at some level. So that's included in between the salary and the cost of those benefits, that's included in the 90,000. These numbers on this page are inclusive of the salary and city cost for benefits.
So the 90,000 includes salary plus city costs for benefits, assuming what we have now.
Correct.
And that's the equivalent to
the top line of option one and the top line of option two.
And there is no, the equivalent then to the bullets 2 and 3 in each option is for now is 0 because it's included in the current 90,000 estimate.
Yes. I mean, I can go back and figure the numbers if to have the same similarities. If half of you were to take spousal coverage and if all of you were to take family coverage, I could figure this for you.
It's confusing to me because you're not, on the one hand, it's what people have now. And
correct.
On the other hand, it's what people might pick.
Right.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
But now at least I understand. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to give you the full range because at any moment, I mean, if there's a completely different change of council or if it's the same council and all of the family benefit levels change for some reason, the potential to have everyone pull a family coverage of insurance, that bottom line of each of those options is the cost that it would be looking at.
Right. But that would also be true if you say everybody here made a different choice.
Correct. Yeah. Any other questions on this? So the other, if you want to flip to the next slide, the other big picture thought and question that you had was the consideration of what's more important, salary or benefits, and in accomplishing what one of the main goals of this conversation was. There's a lot of varying research out there. Salary and bottom line dollar fixes a lot, especially when you're talking about lower income families. However, there's a lot of research out there that shows if the benefits are targeted specifically, a lot of people find targeted benefits, they're more appreciative of it, and it can be more beneficial to them having specific benefits as opposed to just a higher salary. So I don't, and that's going to depend person to person what that looks like. So I don't have an official answer for you. I certainly think that's something that we can continue looking at and have a more specific answer for the next conversation. I don't think that that should keep you from making a decision on this today. And I still believe that any of the benefit changes that are made to regular employee, full-time employer, other benefit eligible employees, council would be able to take advantage of as well. And those are certainly something that I'm going to be presenting over the next couple of budget cycles, is different benefit options that we can consider. And then anything beyond the normal employee benefit package is certainly something that we can look at for the next council compensation conversation.
Okay. Any other slides, Tracy? Or
that is it. I don't know if
it.
It'd be helpful to go back to the last one or not.
I think go back to the last one. It might be helpful and see if my council colleagues have any other questions. And or if people want to, we're going to vote on this soon. And so it would be helpful to get a sense of whether or not folks were leaning towards option 1 or option 2. Councilwoman Dabala.
I think that's an old hand, but I
Oh,
would
okay.
say two things. One is, because I'm just a little slow with the math, maybe for option 1, it would help if I could see how much those bullets 2 and 3 are for the current folks with the current coverage, just so I can get an idea of what a minimalist amount of coverage selection would be, as opposed to half or all the council members getting as much as they can. That said, I think it's important to offer the full health benefit, and that's almost more important to me than which salary level we pick. Is making sure that we offer the health benefit, the 80-20 for people for council members in the future. And somehow my gut tells me that's more important than than the salary level. So I think I lean toward option 1, but I could be convinced otherwise.
Okay, Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it was in the year 2002 that I was off the council and was actually a member of the Council Compensation Committee at that time. And I strongly advocated for a significant increase in the salary of council members, because I felt it was key to increasing participation on the council from some of our lower income residents. That said, my thoughts on, a lot of things have changed, especially the economics between then and now. I wasn't thinking of numbers as high as what option 2 is, so I would say right at this point, I'm leaning towards option 1, but I like our goal, and I think that some of the discussion that the council should have before making a decision is whether we think this, which of these is going to be sufficient to meet our goal, which I think the primary goal that we have is to increase participation in the elections.
Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Smith.
I would say that I lean towards option 2. I think it's immoral to consider option 1.
Thank you. Councilman Searcy.
Sorry, it's double muted. So for me, it's one of these situations where you want to balance the budget, but you also want to keep in mind, as Councilmember Siemens noted, the goal. And whereas I am very fortunate in that I, have a job that allows me to not have to elect certain additional benefits because I get them through my other employer. I do think it's important to make sure that we're able to provide folks who want the opportunity to run for office the ability to get, access to full coverage if they need it. But that said, I also think that, depending on how much someone makes, if you're talking about $16,000 or $20,000, like, is that enough to make someone want to do this? Because although I know that folks have floated around part-time, it is a huge time commitment for folks. So I lean towards option 2, recognizing that the extreme dollar amount for option 2 is high. But that said, the likelihood of us hitting that extreme, you're still going to probably have people. I mean, look at us. Only 2 of us elect for certain benefits, and so, I in the back of my mind think that we probably wouldn't find ourselves in a situation where we'd have all council members electing for family coverage. It's possible, but I do think that having that as an option is important. But it's also important to make sure that we're giving people an adequate salary that would be enough to kind of entice them to make that commitment as well. So I lean more towards option 2, recognizing that the upper bound of option 2 is pricey, but I don't think that we would necessarily find ourselves in a position where we're at that upper bound, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you. And I have a lot of hands up, but I think they're old. So I'm going to go to Councilwoman Costick, and okay, good. They all disappeared.
Thank you. I appreciate the concerns and questions raised by Councilmember Siemens and Councilmember Searcy with regard to meeting our goals and making sure that we're doing that. That's, for me, that's what I'm trying to consider here. And I think the question is also, is option 2 enough to really move the bar on people running for these positions, because it is also a position you need to run for, and it's not a certainty. We're up for re-election every 2 years, so I think that there is some sort of inherent barrier with regard to the structure of the positions that does create a situation where people may not seek to be in the positions if they can have another job that pays an equivalent but is a little more stable in terms of its predictability for the future. So I think kind of longer term, I maybe looking at our terms in terms of the 2 years versus a 4-year might be something to look into for council members. I lean a little bit towards option 2 here. I'm uncertain just in terms of again, how much this will or won't move the needle. I know with our committee recruitments, we added the stipend, which I think is really important. And I don't think we really know yet how big of an influence that will or does or has had on applicants, but I didn't necessarily hear from a lot of people who said that resulted in, seeing that stipend caused them to apply for a committee. And I think, I wonder again with this as well, I think we need to try. So I definitely want to increase the salary levels above what we have now, because I think we need to take the steps that are necessary to try to see if that would help. But I'm a little torn because I also am hesitant to take option 2 and increase the salaries if it isn't achieving our goals in terms of opening up and having more people run for office and more Black and brown people running for office and more representation and diversity on our council. So I'm torn, but at the moment, I think I'm leaning a little towards option 2.
Thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Yes, I would go with option 2. I understand that even option 2 may not be enough to really move the needle, but for a job that's at least at times or much of the time, full-time, the current level just doesn't get us there. And I would also say, in terms of looking at the amounts on the far right, and again, as I understand it, and Tracy can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're already spending 90,000. So even if it went to, say, for example, 240,000, 245,000, that's the so-called new money would only be about 150,000 or so. I'm not saying that's nothing, that's money as well, but the net impact of the figures along the right is those numbers minus 90,000 for what that's worth.
Councilmember Smith, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Councilmember Postic and Councilmember Kovar did touch on something that I've been thinking about is, either one of these proposals, is it going to either change anything? These salaries are not large dollar amounts. It's still going to be difficult for anybody that takes on this position to survive. And I hope future council will look at compensation sooner than what we have this council and previous councils that I've been on. But this job is just going to become more difficult. It's not going to get easier, especially with climate change and how that's going to impact, how it is impacting private residences, and trying to figure out silver bullet, helping people throughout the city with climate change. But that's just one issue. But I'm disappointed that these are the only two options that we have. One I think is just not even a starter. And the other one, I don't know if it's going to do anything to really change who actually comes out and runs for these positions. And then more importantly, when it's time to govern, can you actually have any impact?
Okay.
And I do like the idea of considering moving from 2-year terms to 4-year terms. I think it's way time for us to put that on a referendum for residents to consider.
I see some new hands, Councilman Dabala and Siemens. Dabala?
Yes, I've been thinking about the 4-year term also. And I don't know the form in which we approach it. Maybe it is.
Councilman Dabala, sorry, I don't want to, it's getting late. If we could just focus on, if we can table, and I promise I will ask the city clerk to talk about the 4-year term. I just want to.
I don't want to talk about it tonight. I want to say, I agree, we should look at it.
Yeah.
Thank you, because I think that's an important piece of this.
Thank you. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to respond to Councilmember Smith's frustration and say that, these are the two options that are laid on the table for us to consider. But since we are the council, there's nothing that limits any council member from putting forward a different option and proposing something that they think is better. And I would encourage Councilmember Smith to do so if he thinks he can persuade us to go in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. All right, well, I'll just say, I think I agree. I think Councilwoman Kostick said it, or someone said it, and it's how I've been thinking about it is that, if we go back to what our goals are and we're increasing the salary to have more people be able to run and hold these positions, I think you have to go with option 2. I don't think option 1 is enough of an increase over what we make now to actually make a real difference. So I think if we're going to do this, I'm also in favor of option number 2. So I think in moving forward, we can bring back a resolution that has option number 2. Councilmember Smith, in the interim, if you'd like staff to look at numbers that for council to consider, please let us know. And we can do that at that time. We don't have a council meeting next week, so there is a bit of time to look at some things. This will be a 2 reading ordinance. So we'll keep the schedule and include option 2 in the ordinance. But if we want to consider other things, let us know and we can bring that to council as well. I'm going to look at our city manager and Ms. Smith. Is there anything else you need from us to move forward and prepare the draft ordinances?
Nope, nothing further.
Great, awesome. Then we have our last item tonight is continued discussion of appointments to the city committees. And I'm going to turn it back to Councilman DeBala, Costick, and Siemens.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. And so briefly, this week we're sharing the other half of our recommended slates, this time for 5 advisory committees and the task force on sustainable financing. And I want to say again, on behalf of the subgroup, what a great group of eager volunteers, 115 applicants. I mean, really, that is just great. We can't appoint everyone as much as we would love to. And we encourage anyone who's not formally appointed to participate. And we encourage all council members to share that message. Lots of ways to do that, including being ad hoc members attending committee meetings for the committee of your choice. So to cut to the chase, let's recall that we have 9 voting slots per group. We picked that in the code revisions because that's a manageable number. Some groups were getting a little unwieldy. And we had wanted to engage a wider range of residents, not just the same old, so that does guide some of our choices. And we'll let Councilmember Costick talk about how we made our recommendations, what we were looking for, and we'll let Councilmember Siemens actually share the picks with you. Thank you.
Yes, so as we talked about before at our meeting last week, we used a number of factors as we were going through in the selection process. Those included residency in Tacoma Park, which we as a council had discussed prioritizing, as well as other basic requirements. Why the resident wanted to join the committee, their lived experience and our expertise in the area. And so that includes their experience in the community as well as experience in the specific field itself. And we tried to balance those so that we had a mix of those things within committees as well. Community and organizational affiliation, diversity of age, race, gender, ethnicity, ward, and other components that we saw through the applications. For example, if there were a lot of people coming from one profession, we would try to diversify the committee a little more to provide some different outlooks based on that experience. And then what people could contribute to the group as well, based on their application. So of course, it's difficult sometimes too to get the full picture of someone from an application, as we all know from hiring processes. But we did the best we could in this process, and as Councilmember DeBala said, it was a really tough job, and we wanted to appoint everyone, and we're excited about all of the people who applied and their excitement to be a part of the community and the city in this way. So, you know, it's hard to say no to people, but we also have the great success to say that we have more applicants than we have spots. And that means that people want to be engaged, and we can look for other ways to engage with people as well. Just want to reiterate, as we went into this, our goal was, one of our goals was to make committees more diverse and representative of the community. And we also wanted to specifically attract younger people to the committees, and we wanted to attract more Black and Brown residents to the committees. I think as we've gone through, we've really seen that we haven't exactly hit the mark on those things, but we're closer, and we've learned a lot in the process. And we I think everyone is committed to continuing to find solutions and do improve the processes so that we do and are able to do those things. I will say there were a number of applicants who are newer members of the community, which is positive to see. A number of applicants who are younger than our kind of typical profile for committee members has been, including a couple of teenagers who applied for committees, which is really great. And we did see a general increase in the number of people of color who applied as well. I think it's a little hard to compare because we didn't exactly have a single recruiting process in the past. We were kind of ad hoc appointing people as they came in, but I think that's the general sense of what we saw. So in terms of our approach, I think all three of us on the subgroup really aimed to meet those requirements and the interests of the council as a whole in terms of where we wanted to go, rather than appointing people from our ward or people we knew or anything else, because it is difficult. People on the list are people in many cases that we know and would love to see engaged, but we really tried to look at the big picture as much as possible. And so as much as possible also aimed to appoint people from wards 4, 5, and 6, because those are wards that are less represented in the committees overall and have been historically, as well as people of color and those who are younger than 40. And if younger than 26, even better. And then we did have to make some tough decisions with regard to people living outside of the city who applied as well. And I know that the city clerk also reached out to some people who had sent in applications but do not live in the city and thus were not eligible for some committees. So I will then turn it over to Councilmember Siemens to tell us more about the list of recommendations.
Thank you. And I think both of you have introduced this quite well, so I will just move on to the recommendations. And they are for the Arts and Humanities Committee: Melanie Modlin, Lottie Doty, Ramon Sola, Dale Ingram, Leslie Sapp, John Warren, Thomas Parlin, De Rios, and Bethany Karn. For the Emergency Preparedness Committee: Emily Marshall, Troy Jacobs, Amy Gadhia, Mandy Booth, Diane Sherry, Claudine Schweber, Kathleen Quinn, Jim Della Giacomo, and Chris Beck. For the Grants Review Committee: Mike Schoenig, Derek Shia, Jim Sebastian, Nadine Block, Lucy Moore, Nicole Ferraioli, blew that one. Sorry about that. Mark Schwartz, Susan Rosenblum, Kelly Cochran. Sustainable Maryland Committee: Diana Picone Maniari, Sophia Yarrow, Megan Andriargi, Parag Kandahar, Brittany Baker, David Bend, Chiara Atoyibi, Janet Owens, Arisa Samaru. Recreation Committee, Recreation and Community Engagement: Jill Saletti, Ellen Marcus, Rachna Rickey, Mackenzie Brown, Michael Asrat, Shanna Folker, John Worley, Sherwanda Oliver, and Jay Keller. The Task Force on Sustainable Banking, Victor Theroni, Jay Levy, Rachel Friedman, Lingus, William Gerardo, Michael Ashford, Leslie Hunter, David Bend, Amber Cameron, and Christine Penzich. And that's the end of the list. And I just wanted to take a minute to thank my colleagues for their work on this, but I especially want to thank the city manager or the city clerk, Jesse Carpenter, who was a vital part of our work. She kept us organized and focused on the groups and understanding who was still an applicant that we had overlooked talking about, and she was really a key to our success in getting through this. And with that, I'll turn it back to the mayor.
Well, I guess Councilman DeMalla wants to.
One more quick thing here. Speaking of the city clerk, without whom none of this was possible, council members have received a spreadsheet that puts all of this together. So look for that, which will provide more details on who applied, who was on our recommended list, how that all shapes out with demographic information. We won't walk through that today, but she also just quickly, we'll just run through this. Last week, she did send out a brief overview of all the demographics of the applicants. So about a third of the 115 people are people of color or then that includes Hispanics. The age breakdown, the biggest category is 56 to 70, plus there are 9 people 71 and over. And then in the 26 to 40 and the 41 to 55, there's in the mid 20s. So that's why we were looking at people of color, people who skew younger. Wards 1 and 2 and 3, as usual, had more applicants than 4, 5, and 6 by quite a bit. Thus, our emphasis on 4, 5, and 6. And if you look in last week's information, we can resend it. But if you look in last week's information, you'll see the demographic breakdown of all the applicants for commissions and boards and committees. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
And Mayor, if I may, I would just like to acknowledge to our colleagues on the council that our little subgroup did not finish our job. We also, after the break, we will come back and talk with you about the staff role on committees and what our recommendation is for that, and also any possible role for council members in committee work. We just didn't have the time to get that accomplished before tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we all appreciate all the work that has gone into this. Thank you for your careful deliberation and thinking about these committees. I don't know if my colleagues, Councilmember Kovar, Searcy, or Smith have any questions for the subcommittee? Councilmember Kovar?
I'll just say 2 things. One, I appreciate all the work because I know it was a tremendous task to go through and vet in excess of 100 applications from people, probably most or all of whom were deserving, some of whom are on existing committees currently and that may or may not be able to stay on them under this list. People may wonder why I voted present on the earlier vote, which was for the 4 quasi-judicial panels, and then this next round, which we aren't voting on tonight, but just talking about tonight, is for 5 of the policy or advisory committees plus the banking task force. It's a shorter term one. And really my view on this is, as someone who wasn't a member of this, of the 3 council member group, I think they're the ones who are looking at the individual members, individual applicants rather, and the potential appointees. And I'm thinking of it really not in terms of this person or that person, but what's the overall diversity geographically, racially, ethnically, age-wise, et cetera. And it's no one's fault, but we didn't get the second package really until this afternoon. And I just thought, I don't really have a sense for how all that looks. And I didn't want to base my vote on the 4 that we did today, the quasi judicial ones, without having a clearer idea of all the rest of this. And so I'll turn my attention to that before we do vote. But that's the reason why I voted the way I did. I wasn't against it. I just didn't feel like I had a chance to kind of look at it in that context. I think the work that the 3-member group did was very important, and it was a lot of hard work. So I appreciate that. And I didn't want them to think I had thought they had done anything wrong. So I hope to look over all of that. And I guess we're not doing this next week because we're not meeting next week. So in the next couple of weeks. So thanks again. And just wanted to clarify that point.
Anyone else? No? All right. Well, then I think, thank you again for doing this. And this will come back to us in a couple of weeks when we return to vote on it and get our committees and task force and everything in place. And again, I just want to thank you for your work and thank our city staff and thank everyone who applied and everyone who has served on committees. And so thank you so much. All right. I think that is it for our agenda this evening. And I know the staff is working very hard to get things done for November 3rd. And so we're very much looking forward to digging in deeper, especially on the Public Safety Task Force recommendations. So thank you all. And I'm sure we will see you beforehand, but definitely again on November 3rd. Good evening. We're adjourned.